Good morning. I'd like to call the meeting of the California Collaborative for Educational Excellence to order, and I would like to ask you to join me in the salute of the flag. Please stand. Salute, pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. I would just like to make a couple of announcements before we get started. First, to announce to all board members that any letters from the public on matters before the board are always shared with us on the Friday before the meeting. Please be sure and check your electronic folder. We did not receive any letters for this meeting. Just to remind the audience that there are sign-up cards available on the table outside of the boardroom. If you wish to speak on an item, please complete a sign-up card and place it in the inbox at the staff table where Erica's sitting. Public comment is limited to 2 minutes. Item 11 is the general public comment, during which time members of the public may provide comments on items that are not specifically listed on the board agenda. Otherwise, we will ask for public comment after each item. If you have any materials that you'd like to submit to us, we would ask that you provide 15 copies to Erica with the item number, and she will distribute them to the board members. Please, all speakers, anyone, staff, be sure to introduce yourselves and identify who you represent prior to speaking. And board members, just a reminder to turn your microphones on when you're speaking and turn them off when you're not speaking. I would also want to note that our board member Sandy Lyons is participating via video conference from her school district. She will be joining us shortly, and I think you can see on the screens a little tiny picture of Sandy. So just wanted to let you know that she will be joining us, and we appreciate her doing that. The first thing I have, before I move to item 1, I would like to acknowledge my colleague, Patricia Rucker, who is my colleague on the State Board of Education. Thank you, Patricia, for being here. We're delighted to have you. Thank you. So let's go to item 1. The first item is announcement and oath of office for a new board member. We're delighted to have Karen Monroe join us. Karen is the Alameda County Superintendent, and she replaces Michael Watkins, who we also have the pleasure of in attendance today, and we'll hear from Michael a little bit later. So Karen, if I could have you join me, I'm going to administer the oath of office. So repeat after me. I state your name.
I, Karen Monroe,
Do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support and defend
that I will support and defend
the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of California
the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of California
against all enemies, foreign and domestic,
against all enemies, foreign and domestic,
that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the Constitution
that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the Constitution
of the United States and the Constitution of the State of California,
of the United States and the Constitution of the State of California,
that I take this obligation freely
that I take this obligation freely
without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion,
without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion,
and that I will well and faithfully discharge
that I will well and faithfully discharge
the duties upon which I am about to enter.
the duties upon which I am about to enter.
Thank you. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thanks
Appreciate
for
it. Thank you
joining
so
us. As I said, we're delighted to have Karen. I just want to say a couple things. She's an outstanding county superintendent, and I think I said in our press release that it's wonderful to have someone with her expertise, especially as it relates to urban education, to join us on this board. She has a very illustrious background, including being a teacher, a principal, everything that's most important, I think, to the work that we're doing here, in addition to her work as an administrator and a deputy superintendent in Alameda County before joining us. So Karen, welcome. We're delighted to have you. Thank you so much. And I will also acknowledge that Lupita Cortez Alcala is representing Superintendent Thurman for us today, and we're delighted to have you. I know you've been here at the last couple of meetings, but welcome. We'll now move to item number 2, which is approval of the minutes of the regular board, of the April 4th regular board meeting, and I would entertain a motion on the minutes.
Motion to approve minutes?
Is there a second?
Curious, I asked about this, and maybe you've already found out, but since I'm his designee, technically he wasn't absent, I was, or is that technically where he needs to be
Because it's,
listed as absent? The last meeting, April
okay.
4th.
I don't know. I'll have to ask Jim this question because I think that we have to have an official designation. I don't know for sure that we had that, but you know, it's a technicality to me.
I think we did have a designation.
Okay.
So I think it would be appropriate just to indicate that you were sworn in and that you were present.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that okay? Okay.
So can I clarify though, for that, so she was sworn in, yeah, the prior meeting, that meeting she was absent. So I think we didn't get anything officially designating Lupita from the superintendent, anything in writing. So I think the question was, do we have to have something in writing in order for them to not show him as absent and then Lupita as being a member of the board?
That's our recommendation, is that it is in writing. It was not in writing. There isn't anything specifically that indicates that it should be. But so long as it's, the board accepted the designation, I think it's appropriate that she was here. So, and I think she was sworn in and did participate in the meeting. And
The
former
prior meeting.
Yes.
Two different meetings.
The meeting before.
Right. And so I think Tom's question is, for purposes of this meeting, April 4th, where we didn't get a designation and she wasn't able to attend, how should it be reflected in the minutes?
That the superintendent or the designee were not present.
Okay,
Okay, thank you.
sure. So would you like the minutes amended to say that?
Yes, please.
Okay. So do you accept that, Tim? Okay. Is there a second?
I second it.
Okay. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Yeah, you're abstaining. Right. Okay. Thank you. Item number 3, and before I go too far into this, I should have said this at the very beginning. Let me ask Tom about, we may need to reorder because we have some people who are delayed in Los Angeles. I just wanted to check and see if we wanted to reorder the items.
Yeah, I would like to suggest we reorder, especially since we have some guests that are here as well too, so that moving them up gives them an opportunity to present and then to leave as well too, because they may have flights too. So I would recommend that if we can move items 7 and 8 below items 10 and move everything else up.
Okay. Is it that, okay, seeing no objection, we will move those items. So now we are on to item 3, amendment to the bylaws. And I think the presenters here are Tom and Jim Baca, our legal counsel.
Yeah, I'll let Jim speak to this too. Two specific pieces in the bylaws that are changes. One is to reflect changes in ed code that have occurred since the bylaws were written, which are a few years old now too. So it's to reflect those new changes, as well as with your decision that you have an action, I think, to take some action on your board meeting schedule. It would require you to reflect that into the bylaws.
A button.
Thank you. A couple of other things. These were the original bylaws that were established before we even knew what we were doing. And I think with the help of CDE, we established the bylaws in order to allow the board to move forward. So I think Tom is correct. There have been significant statutory changes. The primary one has been to shift from a fiscal agent to an administrative agent. That is fairly significant in terms of the way that the collaborative does its business. It does its business primarily through the administrative agent rather than at meetings now. The statute reflects that, and I think it was important that the bylaws reflected that as well. A couple of other things, there has been kind of established protocol that we have been following, and I think the bylaws now conform to our established protocol. For example, the selection of the chair, the selection of the vice chair, which had never been done before. So if you read the bylaws, the bylaws read as if it was a brand-new organization rather than an established organization. And then the last thing, and significantly, are the number of meetings. And we had some discussion at the last board meeting concerning how many board meetings we needed to have. The statute does not specify how many board meetings are required. And one of the questions was, could we write the bylaws in a way that allowed us to have the number of board meetings that were appropriate for the business that was necessary to be conducted? So the bylaws have been rewritten to allow for that. And there is an item later in the agenda in which the board, if it adopts the bylaws, will then adopt a schedule for the remainder of the year. And then at the last meeting of the year, we'll adopt a schedule for the coming year.
Okay. Thank you. Are there any questions about the proposed bylaw changes? Or Tom, anything else you want to add?
Yeah, I apologize for bringing this up right now, but Jim, and help me understand, if the board hasn't taken action yet to change the board meeting schedule. That's the next item on the agenda. So is it
Yes.
appropriate for them to change the bylaws prior to taking action on or if they choose not to, that action doesn't pass, we probably would we still make the reflection in the board bylaws?
And the board bylaws need to pass in order for the board to take action to change the board meetings.
Thank you.
And just to clarify, people who are interested in that language, it's on page 5 under section 2. Remember that when we first started meeting, we set an exact date, and it says, this is in the strikeout, that it would be the first Thursday of every other month beginning in June of 2015. The proposal is to allow the governing board, require the governing board to meet at least 4 times during each calendar year and to establish that calendar going forward. So presumably we would do that for the rest of this year in our next item. And then also, I would assume at the last meeting of this year, we would establish the schedule for the following year. And that, just so you know, that's consistent with what we do at the state board. We're always a year ahead of time letting people know when we're meeting, but setting the meeting at the actual board level, not being prescribed in the bylaws. So that's the difference here.
I had a question.
Gina?
On page 3, when we're talking about nominations of the chair and vice chair and the gavel being passed to the vice chair to preside over the election, is it assumed that the vice chair wouldn't have been nominated?
I'm sorry, could you say the section
So
again?
it says that if the chair is nominated, the chair shall pass the gavel to the vice chair to preside over the election. Is it assumed that they can't be nominated for the vice chair can't be? What if they were both nominated? Can they still preside over that election for chair?
Well, that's an interesting question. If both were nominated, then I think the chair would designate somebody.
Okay.
We could add that if you would like, because there is a possibility that the chair and the vice chair are both nominated for the chair position. Once the chair position has been established, it's easier to then elect the vice chair. But I think under Robert's rules, the chair does have the opportunity to give the gavel to somebody who is usually the most senior person.
Okay,
Well, if we don't need a change, if there's already a rule, but I just thought about that.
okay. Sounds like the rules would take care of that. Okay. Any other questions, comments? I'll just say I know that we started this little process to take care of the issue about meetings, but it realized that once we got in there, it was like, wow, this is a good opportunity to really tighten these up and make them conform with current law. So I appreciate you doing that.
Thank you.
So I would entertain a motion on the proposed changes to the bylaws.
I'll make a motion, we approve the bylaws as presented.
Okay, is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay. It's been moved and seconded. Is there any public comment on the amendment to the board bylaws? Seeing none, and I do see Sandy now. Sandy, you're very tiny on my screen, so you might have to wave a lot if you want to talk or, yay, there, perfect. Do you have any questions, Sandy, or comments?
No, thank you.
Okay.
Na-
So
Madam
all the-
Chair, can I suggest that we
Sure.
do roll call votes since we are teleconferencing?
Okay. I don't have anything to do a roll call vote with, but I will. Vice Chair Sabrante,
Aye.
Sandy Lyon,
Aye.
Karen Monroe,
Aye.
Lupita Alcala,
Aye.
Sue Burr, aye. It's unanimous. Thank you. Okay, we're moving to item 4. Now we're on to the amendments to the board schedule. So Tom, this is to the 2019 board schedule, and then talk about, I think, how we'll establish for 2020.
Right. So at the last meeting, the board had a discussion about moving from every other month to going to quarterly meetings. We were trying to adjust around a few different schedules. One of the pieces that we tried to look at in particular was around trying to make sure that we didn't have the same month where we have the State Board of Education meeting. And so we made sure that we altered that, as well as we stuck with Thursdays, right? And so we tried to make sure that we stayed with that same piece. And so the board discussed a couple different options. We weren't able to make it perfectly quarterly, so where we landed at the last meeting is the board had discussed this idea of 2-month, 4-month, 2-month, 4-month. And I believe that's where the board had landed at that time. And you'll see, I think, in your schedule there, that option is option, I don't know if everybody has an option 2. And option 2 would reflect what the meetings would look like over the next, so again, for this year, and again, we are referencing the fiscal year, right? So the fiscal year is starting in July. So the first meeting is August, and then December, February, and June, and then we go all the way through 2020. So then I think the board would have to probably visit next, I would suggest when we come back in June on June 4th, we look at the remainder of that other year, to get the remaining 2 dates after December 2020.
Okay. So I think just for board members, I think you all have this chart. Sandy, do you have it as well?
I do.
Okay. In front of you. I'll just say the dates because I don't know that the folks who are watching or in the room have a copy of this. We'll make sure it's posted on the website. But the next meeting would then be August 1st of this year, then December 5th, and December 5 coincides with the CSBA meeting, which was, I think, also another interest of the board to try to make it consistent with that so that folks who are attending can also do both, and hopefully that people who are attending the CSBA meeting would be able to attend our meeting if they're interested. Then for 2020, it would be February 6th, June 4, August 6th, and December 3rd. So that's what we have in front of us. Are there any questions or comments? Folks have a preference one way or the other?
I'd like to take a step back perhaps and just maybe revisit or just ask in terms of the recommendation again, in terms of going from 6 to 4, because from a bylaw standpoint, I think it makes sense, just to say at least 4 times. Doesn't mean we can't meet more than 4. And I know we discussed it, but maybe just refresh my memory in terms of, why the recommendation to go into 4 meetings.
I think that actually came from some members of the board. I think that there was some interest in the board's part that I think in particular now that we're into our 4th year, I think that things are more established. There was more of a need to meet, as well as I had heard pretty strongly this need for the board to have more communication. So we've really tried to make sure that we up our communication, and you see that reflected in your board notes. And so the board has felt fairly comfortable with having quite a bit of information about what's happening and feel the need to have to meet every other month.
And I'll just chime in. I think the board member he's referring to is me, which is because it's consistent with the way FCMAT meets. Also, they meet quarterly. And I think the nature of our work is such that it's really policy-oriented. We don't need to meet as frequently as we do, in my view, for the volume of business that we have. And so to make sure that everybody can participate, because you all are busy folks, and that we get maximum public participation, it seemed like this was a reasonable thing to think about.
Yeah, no, and I think that's fine. I mean, I think if that's the case, option 2 does allow windows if we do need to have a meeting in October as well as April,
Right.
If there's a need. I mean, the advantage of meeting every other month is it allows members of the public or anyone that has, concerns or issues they want to bring to the board's attention to do that. So that's It's my only concern about going from 6 to 4, but I mean, I think that communication, I think from staff to the board is certainly improved. I just want to make sure that we have opportunities to garner feedback from the public as well, so.
Okay.
And I think maybe that's where being at CSBA, if one of the meetings is going to be there, because there's so many key educational stakeholders at that meeting, it is an opportunity for us, even though it's an annual thing, to be really proactive in terms of being in the field and garnering some of that feedback.
And just to reinforce what you said, Tim, that we do have the ability to call special meetings if you want to go back to the bylaw that we just approved on page 5. The chair can call special meetings, and there's also provision for emergency meetings. So I think we're covered if we need to do that. But I appreciate what you said about communication. I do think that Tom and the staff have done really yeoman's work. Anne is here. I saw her earlier. Both in communicating with the board, but also just general public-facing communication on our website and through the podcast and that. But we'll certainly be attentive to that.
Yeah, and making sure that people can communicate that feedback back to us directly as
Right.
board members as well. So,
I did want to clarify for the December 5th meeting. So we will be in San Diego. I think at this time we have the San Diego County Office of Ed is where we have, I think that's where you had it prior, the last time you had that too. So we won't be right at the conference, which I did talk with Vern and Billy a little bit about that too. And he said that necessarily wouldn't be appropriate, but I think the goal is still met, right? That folks who are interested could come, as well as board members who would be attending the CSBA conference could attend that as well.
yeah. No, and I think that's good. I just think, the opportunity for, staff working with the board so board members can get feedback from key stakeholders, especially if we're going to go to the quarterly meeting, I think is really important.
Okay.
I just want to go on record and say that the only thing, just FYI, is for myself or any superintendent of a high school district or a unified school district, the June meeting will always be challenging.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, and I appreciate you bringing that up. I think that has been an issue for us in the past with graduations and end of the year activities. So we'll try to be attentive to that as we get there. So I'm willing to entertain a motion to adopt.
Madam Chair,
Yes, sorry.
I'm going to be technical. Under the bylaws, what we need to do today is establish the meetings for the remainder of this year.
Okay.
And at the last meeting of this year is when we establish the schedule for next year.
Okay.
So we would then only need to establish that we will have a meeting in December. And at the December meeting, then we establish the schedule for the coming year. Under the bylaws, it says in the last meeting of the year, you establish the schedule for the coming year.
Okay, and you're saying that we don't need to do anything about the August 1st meeting because that coincides with what the prior bylaws, and we've already established that date?
The August 1st meeting will be the third meeting. We do have to have 4 meetings.
Right.
And you do have to establish when the 4th meeting will be. And then, and that will be in December. And then in December, you establish the schedule for the next year.
Yeah, I'm just trying to clarify about that. I get that we're supposed to do it for the rest of 2019, but do we include the August meeting and the December meeting, or just the December meeting in the motion?
I would include both the August and the December meeting since we changed the bylaws. I mean, we've already noticed that the August meeting will occur, but my recommendation from a transparency public standpoint that we go ahead and indicate both meetings.
Okay. Do I have a motion to approve the August 1st and the December 5th meeting for 2019?
So moved.
Okay, it's been moved. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Seconded. Is there any public comment on the motion? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to call the roll so Jim doesn't yell at me. Vice Chair Sobrante.
Aye.
Sandy Lyon.
Aye.
Karen Monroe.
Aye.
Lupita Alcala.
Aye.
Sue Burr, aye. Passed unanimously. Thank you. Item 5, renewal of the agreement with legal counsel.
Yes, so you'll see in your packet too that we're bringing to you for the board to take action to renew our agreement for an additional year with our legal counsel, Atkinson, Andelson, Loya, Ruud, and Romo. And Jim and I have talked. I do want to recognize a couple of things in particular about Jim in particular, as well as the legal counsel too, is that beyond all the work they did to get us established, and they continue to guide us and help us around this work too. Jim is somebody who takes his work very personally, right? And so he's somebody I can reach out to at any time. He's always willing to kind of meet and do whatever it needs to happen. He's worked really closely with Brooks in particular, Brooks Allen and Marin, and has worked with our folks and Sue and I when that needs to happen. In addition, I had went to him and spoke with him, and then and Sue and I had spoke earlier in the year with Jim a little bit about, was there any ways to even, we were concerned about some of the cost. Not that there was anything inappropriate about the cost, but just because we were concerned, because we're always trying to watch our dollars, and Jim did everything he could to kind of take a look at how to continue to provide us really good counsel, as well as reducing, and done a great job of reducing and helping us with that cost, and is suggesting the same moving forward. So you'll see a reduction in our contract as far as the financial impact to the organization, and that I think really speaks to his interest in this organization as a whole. So I would recommend that the board approve the new agreement.
Okay, thank you. Jim, do you want, anything you want to say?
I'm just here to answer questions if there are any questions.
Okay.
I've been with the organization since almost the onset, so.
Any questions or comments about the agreement?
No, I just want to thank you and your firm for all the great work that you've done from day one, and really helping to get us established, and working through a lot of the issues. So wholeheartedly support the work, and I'd like to make a motion that we approve the contract before us.
Okay, we have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any public comment on the motion? I will just add my compliments to Jim and my deep appreciation for all of your work, and I really appreciate your thriftiness. Thank you. Okay, here's the roll call. Vice Chair Sabrante.
Aye.
Sandy Lyon.
Aye.
Karen Monroe.
Aye.
Lupita Alcala.
Aye.
Sue Burr, aye. That motion passes unanimously. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.
Item 6, 2018-19 CCEE budget revision and proposed budget for 2019-20. Tarina. I think it's on.
There you go. How's that? Better. Okay. Good morning, Chair Burr, Executive Director Amarlino, and members of the board. Tarina Morris, Deputy Superintendent for the Marin County Office of Education. Today I'm here with Barbara Henderson, who is the Senior Director at the Marin County Office of Education. And missing today is Brooks Allen, the CCEE Liaison and Counsel for the Marin County Office of Education. Brooks is sorry to miss today. He is attending his son's 5th grade graduation, and as we all know, with the work that we do, that's extremely important. So today what I'd like to do is present an overview of the 2018-19 budget revision number 3 and the proposed budget for the 1920 fiscal year that reflects the May revision to the Governor Newsom's proposed budget for 1920, specifically for the CCEE. The 18-19 budget makes relatively minor adjustments to the approved budget, largely reflecting lower than anticipated expenditures in operations. For the 1920 proposed budget, this is based on the governor's May budget revision, which includes an annual appropriation of $11.7 million. The legislature is currently wrapping up their work on their response to this proposal, but the headline is largely that the CCEE components in the budget remain nearly identical to what the governor proposed in January. The highlights which we provided to you in February and also note in the memo for this meeting include, this is the second year for ongoing funding for the CCEE, an increase in total funding of $232,700 specifically for operations, and a grant of broader discretion to prioritize CCEE's statutory activities by simplifying the ongoing funding into two schedules. One overarching system of support, and the second, the general operations schedule. The schedule also includes $766,000 in for the administrative agent, as specified in the proposed Budget Act. With respect to one-time funds, this also reflects the wrapping up of the pilot and pilot partnerships that are coming to a close this fiscal year, as directed by the legislature and the administration in previous budget acts. This also includes the community engagement's first full year of operations in conjunction with the lead agency consortium, which includes San Bernardino County, County Superintendent of Schools, Families in Schools, and the California Association of Bilingual Education. In addition, there were two proposals in the governor's May revision that we did not include in this budget, largely because they have not yet fully been vetted by the legislature. But both, I think, are notable in that they capitalize on greater opportunities for partnerships with the California Department of Education. And the first includes one-time funds to establish an educator workforce investment grant, and the second is utilizing ongoing federal funds for a 21st Century California School Leadership Academy. In summary, as ever, the CCEE's budget continues to evolve as the organization itself continues to evolve in response both to the administration and the legislature and its partners in the statewide system of support, as well as LEAs across the state. As the CCEE's administrative agent, the Marin County Office of Education monitors and reviews all budget assumptions and obligations in collaboration with CCEE staff on an ongoing basis, and will continue to bring budget revisions back to the board and to the Department of Finance. The next one we anticipate would be in August if the board were to meet. And with that, I recommend approval.
Thank you, Trina. Any questions or comments on the budget update and the proposed budget for 2019-20? Lupita.
Yeah, I just, I had wanted to kind of, on page 4, when we talk about program areas for the budget 2019-20, I was looking to see if there was any more detail on that, but if maybe staff or executive director could respond to sort of some of the choices that were made and why some went up, some went down, some maybe were actualized. We can speak a little bit more detail about that.
Yeah, so you'll see on page 4 too that we have roughly there's 8 items there. So just reminding a little bit about the board. So what you see different this year than last year, much of this work is work that we've been doing. So last year those monies would come in specific buckets. So last year, for example, around technical assistance, we received $2.5 million, and then we received another $5 million that was really specific to our PLNs. Even though last year that $5 million was defined as system of support money, the PLNs were in their second year, so those monies were kind of already allocated, so that's what we used those monies for. And then we had specific money, one-time monies around the pilots. So this year what you see is basically pilot monies have gone away, and that $2.5 million that was technical assistance and the $5 million in system of support are under one bucket. So it gives us $7.5 million. That was flexibility that we requested from the Department of Finance based on trying to figure out where the need would be. The biggest change, I think, from last year is around the technical assistance. Technical assistance was just a dollar amount, not necessarily defining what that technical assistance work would look like. And then AB 1840 happened in August, and in particular now we were asked to go in and work directly with, according to statute, with some districts that are in fiscal distress. So what you see under direct technical assistance, these are estimates from the staff based on the work that we're already doing, as well as some estimates of work that we plan to do for the following year. So a couple of things that might help with that. So around direct technical assistance, we have 2 districts in particular that we've worked quite a bit with this year. Inglewood, which the board is really familiar with, and then Vallejo, who the superintendent is here this morning. You'll hear a little bit about that work too. What you'll see reflected in next year's budget is some specific strategies, as well as even some positions and some contracts that we've already established for this coming year. for both of those districts, as well as we have other monies in there for technical assistance. For example, we're right in the middle of conversations right now with Sacramento County Office of Ed and Sac City about interest that they have of doing some work with them. We've just started to do a little bit of work with Oakland and the Alameda County Office of Ed. And so some of these are budgeted estimates of monies we've kind of set aside, thinking that these will be where some resources will be needed. So that 2.75 is an example of those various pieces in there, as well as what we find with the CCEE is we never know what's going to come at us, right? And so especially around technical assistance, to where, according to statute, county offices or districts and charter schools can ask us to do technical assistance work. And if we have agreements through the county office and the geographic lead, it gives us flexibility on how to use those monies. So we're making sure that we have some monies that are available there when those requests come. Some of the other areas that you'll see, the system of support. So the system of support in particular, as I know you're really well aware of, is that our work with CDE in particular, it requires us to facilitate basically the various agencies, specifically the geographic leads and the SELPA leads. And so there's specific work about bringing them together, as well as bringing all the other leads together. And so all of the resources that are required in order to do that are reflected in that dollar amount, as well as there's an evaluation piece that we have an RFA that's out right now for the evaluation around the geographic leads and the SELPA leads too. So there's a cost to that. So those monies you'll see those reflected in that $762,000. And some other specific pieces you'll see, we've talked about this networks and convening. So our professional learning networks, as we talked about last year, we've been roughly spending around $5 million. So we've pretty much cut that in half. So our goal is to continue doing some of that work, in particular with some of our partners who we're really seeing some, and you'll see an example of that of the CAAASA presentation today, where we're seeing folks who have really done some really good work, and we want to be able to support them to continue that work. So Ish, I think Ryder will be coming up and speaking a little bit to that a little bit later on. Communications, for example, communications is specifically around the work that Anna does for us. So all of anything around our podcast, any of our materials that we're putting out, we're specifically, and again, this has been a strong interest of the board, is making sure that folks are really aware of what we're doing. So that's kind of where the budget is around that. Sure.
Tim.
Tom, can you talk a little bit about, I don't know it's still a work in progress, but the 21st Century California School Leadership Academy, what that might look like? And again, I know it's a proposal, it's an idea, but maybe just you could share some thoughts about how you see that playing out.
Yeah, I did spend some time with Linda Darling-Hammond, who I believe has some experience with this and some of her interest in this in the budget. I have some personal experience with it because I went through it many years ago, and I was much younger. And so it's very similar. The concept is very similar to what existed then. What existed, I think it started actually in '82, is there were 11 county offices throughout the state who provided administrative, it wasn't tied to your administrative credential, and this will not be either. So it's really focused, kind of a similar concept. It wasn't necessarily be county offices. County offices could apply, but there would be these academies that would exist throughout the state. And those academies would have some systemic practices. So they would kind of identify, and some of it's identified in the statute as to what they would receive in that training. What you'll see in there too is there's a lot. They've added, it's quite different than the CSLA, I believe, that I went through too, which was really more focused around managing, I think, a school. Then this is really focused on instruction, and it encourages teachers to be a large part of that. So it's not specific to administrators. It's quite open, actually. And the goal, I know when I spoke with Linda too, is to be able to support administrators, right? Especially site level administrators. But there is some ability to be able to support district level, even superintendents. But there's an interest of really having teachers who are in that leadership role. And as Linda and I talked about it too, and as I said, we have quite a bit of work that we'll need to do with the department to kind of determine when we do that RFA exactly what that would look like. we've been kicking around this idea of this whole leadership team idea, where folks would come, where a group of folks would come from a district or from a school, specifically with teachers and the site level administrators, and then possibly even the district level administrators, which, interesting enough, that's very similar to what we've done with our pilots around this idea where they've come to that training together, build some of their capacity to go back and then lead at the local level.
I really like the idea, and again, I know this is a work in progress, working with the department, but site-based, I think is really important because I know we've done a lot of high-level work, which is obviously part of the change that's needed in systems of support, but that site-based training, for site-based administrators and site-based teachers, I think is really important. So I'm glad to hear that.
It's actually, I think if you, and again, and this shouldn't surprise anybody that knows Linda too, that is where her main interest is trying to make sure that we see the differences in classrooms.
Absolutely.
Right? Really get to teaching and learning.
Absolutely.
And that's why it's fairly open to and really encouraging teachers to be a part of that.
Great. That's great.
Karen?
So in the interest, I'm doing a lot of listening and learning today. So I just have a couple of questions. One is more procedural one. I was looking, so is this the budget that exists online for CCEE, or is there a more, is there a more detailed version available?
The budget you have in your packet is the budget that's online.
Okay,
Yes.
so, and I know that Tom and team have been very open about if there are specific questions, I can certainly drill down on those, so I just wanted to make sure. The other thing, something that I sadly know way too much about, but the direct technical assistance around AB 1840, since that's the largest designation in this particular section of the budget, just really wanted to know what your current thinking is about how those funds are going to be utilized around this. It's definitely something that is somewhat open-ended, so curious to hear more.
Yeah, what's unique about those, and actually I think that's what really the way the system support is built, is it really, it will depend on each of the places we're working in. So for example, in Inglewood, we're there with LACO, with the district, and together as a group, as they've defined the goals of what it is they're trying to achieve and get better at, we figure out how we can support them in that. So LACO, for example, will say, we've got this, we can help them with this, we've already have these trainings, we're doing this, we have a position, we can help with this, and then they're saying, we could use your help around special ed, for example, or in LACO, for example, they have, in Inglewood, they struggle a little bit around assessment data, right? And so they have a full-time data position that we're paying for in that district. There's professional development that we are specifically doing with instructional coaches, teachers, and principals that they've asked our support with. So the same thing would happen in Oakland, for example, right? As we begin that work with you, and we have the district and the county office together with us at the table, are trying to figure out instructionally what it is that we want to go after, right? And then based on those needs, what resources can we provide? So we don't have a specific dollar amount that we've said we're going to budget this. We've really been fairly fluid with that based on where the needs are.
So just a couple things for me. I'll start with that point that I think we talked about this a little bit maybe in the last couple of years. I worry a little bit about districts who are coming to us for help seeing the CCEE as a piggy bank. And candidly, I think a lot of LEAs get in trouble because they have difficulty managing their resources and putting them to high priority activities. So I just want to put that out there, that I think it's a good question. I think we need to keep asking it, because let's just take the example of they have a data coach and our money goes away, and then what do? That's a very critical item for them, in my view, to have a data coach to know what they're doing. So I just want us to be cautious about that. I think that's been the history we've known from the very beginning for those of us who've been here, that's been a little bit of an issue. So now that our budget's kind of settling down, I'd like to make sure that we're aware of that. The other thing I will say, just again, is from the very beginning, and Tim will remember this, and Michael, who's sitting in the audience, that we had a lot of discretion at the very beginning. We had $10 million in money, and it was kind of like, what do we want to do when we grow up, right? And we created pilot programs, we created professional learning networks. all of which I think were fantastic. We're going to hear about the results of that as we get into the fall. But over time, as people have realized what a great resource CCEE is, we have been directed to spend our money in a very specific way, and that comes from the legislature. So a lot of what you're seeing, almost all of it of what you're seeing, is really legislatively directed or administratively directed, meaning coming from the governor's office and the Department of Finance. All of the leads that we got last year, for example, in my view, the geographic, the community engagement, the SELPA, all came from whiz-bang ideas that people had, which is fine, and I think there's a need there. But I think I'm saying this because I think it's important for the board to recognize that most of our resources are really very specifically directed. And what we're hearing here is Tom's best thinking along with the staff about how do you deploy those resources given those statutory responsibilities. So it's a little different, and I'll just say, Trina, for me, having been a CBO, and seeing these very detailed schedules, that's definitely what you need to do at an LEA level. There's no doubt about it. That's, transparency for local officials, et cetera. It's a little tricky at this board, in my view, to see that level of detail, because we don't really have that much discretion, is what I'm saying, because it's directed by the legislature. I think it's fine for us to give direction to Tom about, hey, we want to use our resources most effectively. But I just wanted to put it in context a little bit because I think it's a little bit confusing, especially since we have new board members too. Hopefully that's helpful. But and my last thing, and this is my little pet peeve, I don't like using bill numbers because bill numbers change every 2 years. So in the next legislative session, there'll be a different AB 1840. And it's also, to me, it's a way to not communicate effectively to the public who has no idea what AB 1840 is. So I'd like to call it what it is, what the program is, or the assistance that we're providing. Same thing with, direct technical assistance but just my little pet peeve about bill numbers.
Yeah, and I appreciate those thoughts too, and that it really is, according to statute, it's direct technical assistance. That's really what we get money around, and now in the new bucket, it's system of support. So that whole 7.5 million is coming to us under this bucket of system of support, which is pretty broad bucket. It seems to be getting broader. The piece that I really wanted to make sure that I emphasized is, and I think I heard it really strongly from the board early on, I heard it from the Department of Finance, is that we're focusing really hard on not doing these one-off type things of work, right? So we really believe our role is to work collectively with the folks locally who have that local context, but our goal is to build capacity. So even around that data position, the goal of that data position is to help them put structures and things in place because they don't have the capacity to do that, and then help build their capacity, and then we get out. Same thing around some of the special ed. And it is a struggle, and you'll hear some of that from Superintendent Clark a little bit too, is that I think folks struggle a little bit too because they have direct needs that they want us to provide them right now. Yeah. And we put them through quite a bit of work before we'll give them any money. I think I can remember Adam coming to us more than one time and going, man, when am I going to get some resources around this piece, and saying, well, we have to make sure there's capacity, right? That if we actually provide some training and research, what's the actual plan to implement it? Right, and how are we going to measure it? And so we've been very strong and adamant about it. You'll see when you hear from Ish a little bit later too around our PLNs are very focused this year, and particularly around matching resources. So if you're asking you to be in part of it, you have to match some of the monies to be able to put it up, and you have to specifically talk about your theory of action, how you're going to get to student outcomes, right? How are you going to get to the student outcome piece too? So we've shifted pretty hard our work around that, and not because, as you had mentioned, not because we weren't necessarily doing that. Some of we weren't actually asked to do that, right? Especially around the PLNs in particular, right? We weren't asked to actually get at those types of outcomes in the very beginning.
I think you were by me, but that's okay. Tim.
Just one other, I know that I think you're working with Brooks on developing a fee-for-service model. Do you want to give an update on that and what that might look like? Because there are some districts that don't necessarily qualify for direct technical assistance, but they want to engage with CCEE. What's the status of that? What might that look like?
Josh, I may have you kind of speak to this a little bit too. I don't know if Tarina's prepared for that question, but she might be.
Maybe.
maybe. All right, why don't I let you, well, let me just speak specifically to, so what Tim is referring to is that around technical assistance, right, if folks ask for our resources, right, they can, if it's around technical assistance, right, and we work through the county office and the geographic lead, it gives us the discretion to be able to provide them resources, including our staff time as well as our monies. The thing that's key to that piece is we always have the ability to say no. There's nowhere in there that, because we will run out of money, right, if we were to do that. So we really have to be thoughtful. Folks also have the ability to directly call us up and say, we'd like you to do some work around whatever this particular is. We are very focused on that work has got to be tied to what our mission is, right, direct technical assistance. So we have actually our first, we've never had anybody where we've charged them. So we have our first example of that this year. We're doing work actually with a charter school that's requested some resources. And so because of that, we had to figure out how we're going to charge them, right? And what would our costs be too. So we've worked pretty heavily through Josh's leadership and Brooks and Tarina and their folks too on a kind of how we're going to do that. So they can speak a little bit more to that piece.
So I think I would like to call Josh up because I can tell you that where we have been working is designing a structure. So and it would all depend upon what the ask looked like. So it could be that an LEA comes to the CCEE and requests a certain level of support, and the CCEE is nothing more than a broker or an agent, would be connecting two people together, an LEA with an area level expert. And in that instance, there's no charge. That's just the CCE fulfilling its statutory role to provide support to LEAs. In another instance, it could be that an LEA comes to the CCEE and there's direct in-house ability to provide and respond to that support. And so we're developing schedules around what would those charges look like, and it would be largely on a reimbursement basis. And I think the third bucket I could describe would be it would be actually the CCEE in partnership with another agency and the LEA, where there may be a role for the CCE, so rather separate and different from the first that I described, which would be just partnering and brokering two people together, two agencies together. This could be a little more involved and engaged on the CCEE side. Now, there's probably more detail that I don't have, so if my colleague Josh Daniels would like to correct me or fill in any details.
Morning, Josh.
Good morning, Josh Daniels, Director of Finance and Operations. I'm a little sick, so I'm going to keep my distance from Tarina. I do want to call out Barbara Henderson, who did much of the legwork from Marin, and she's here today on this and many other topics. Tarina basically summarized it quite well. There are a range of ways that we would interact with an LEA that we're directly providing support to on a fee-for-service basis. And I'm happy to answer any questions, but Tarina summarized it quite well.
Good, Tim?
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And I think that is speaking to the chair's original comments about, when you started, we had a little more broad flexibility. And then, obviously, for a variety of the factors that were outlined, now it's a little bit more specified, which is a good thing because I think that helps define our role a lot more. But I think, fee for service, because there are others out there that say, hey, I'd like to engage with CCE. I'm not sure, how or what's the best way. And, sometimes there's varying relationships with county offices and, they're in different positions. So I think this is an opportunity, I think, for us to, really provide some direct, support to the field of those that request it. So I'm happy to hear this moving forward and look forward to, further updates and examples, especially as, some districts and charters sign on.
Thank you.
I just wanted to make one comment about that too. So again, we've tried really hard this year to define our lane, right? A lot of it's been defined for us. They give it in these larger, broader perspectives. But even on those fee-for-services piece, for example, if we had a couple of districts that contacted us around differentiated assistance, right? Last year, we actually went in and did that work separate from the county office. This year, when that came, we pulled in the county office, had conversations with them and said, how do you want to handle this? Do you want us to do this, not do this? Should we do this together? And in each of those cases, we've been able to use our resources, right, because the county office said, yeah, let's do this together. And we're actually intentional about, we don't want that to be doing that separately. That work in particular, because it's local work, local context. Some of this other fee-for-service, for example, this one that we have right now, is actually, it's a little bit different, right? So there's a request around how can we help them kind of take a look at what they're doing currently to try to make sure that their LCAP is actionable and something that really helping them around that work. Well, county offices have that responsibility, but not necessarily for charter schools, right, around the LCAP piece. So in that case too, talked with the district as well and had conversations about Word, because they have that role. That was a good place for us to fit, right? There's a place for us to fit where we didn't step on other toes, right? As well as that's kind of work where you can kind of one-off, right? You can go in and help them around that piece, right? To get better at that piece, build their capacity, and then leave. Because the way the system board is really built, right, is just trying to have local context, right? So we're always really thoughtful about, if we go in there and do that, is that county office work, right? Or two, where's the ability to sustain it, right? And the system is actually built around, a lot of the sustainability is built around the folks locally working together. So it's not easy, right? I think that we're trying to be really thoughtful.
Oh, no, and absolutely. And there's no, I would never suggest that we just parachute in, you know, without talking to anybody at the local level. I mean, of course, those local conversations need to happen. And we're not going to be able to fulfill every request that comes to us, nor should we. But sometimes there are reasons why, you know, after we've had some of those local conversations that, you know, maybe, you know, we are, you know, the fit to go in. So, you know, doing that, and I think having a cost recovery model where it doesn't, you know, impact our own budget, like you said, the proper reimbursements. But I'm excited to hear about that, and I think there's some good opportunities.
Okay, thank you. Sandy, did you have any questions on the budget?
The only question, I was going to actually ask it later when we talk about the bridge program for those networks, was looking at the budget here, is there enough in there to make sure that, are you looking to accommodate anybody who's eligible for that, or have you sort of capped that at a certain number?
Tom, yeah.
Sandy, I want to make sure I understood the question. So what I heard was, yeah, so the RFAs are out there, and they just, I think yesterday they closed. I think that's correct, Ishan, too. So we did budget up to a certain amount, right? So if we get more than that, we will have to finesse that a little bit, have to choose. But a lot of our decision will be based on their theory of action, right? And is how they're actually going to get at what we'd asked for in the RFA, if you will. Not an RFA specifically, but the application. So we may have to narrow that down. We may have to maybe not be able to fund them as many, to fund more. So we'll have to finesse that. But we don't have enough information yet to know where we're at with that yet.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Other questions on the budget? Before we take action, is there any public comment on item 6? Okay, seeing none. One last thing before I ask for a motion, just to the comment about the school leadership model. I really appreciate what you said about and clarifying that it's not just about administrators, that there's really going to be a focus on teachers as well, on teacher leadership teams as well. The one caution I have, and again, this is from someone who's been around ed policy way too long, some of those professional development programs in the past, not just the administrator one, but the subject matter projects, et cetera, which were kind of resurrecting, got captured by NCLB, in my view, and they became very prescriptive. It was like, what about this? What about your test scores? What about... So I really appreciate the new, I just want us to kind of eyes wide open, go into those knowing there may be some of that hanging around, because that, you know, people have a hard time believing that we're not in that mode anymore. So to the extent we keep doing, this is about continuous improvement, this is about everybody being part of it, stakeholders, et cetera, I think we're all going to be better off. So just another random thought. Is there a motion?
I'll make a motion that we approve budget revision number 3 for 18-19, and that we approve the proposed budget for 19-20, which is based upon the May revise.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, 2 seconds. I'm going to call the roll. Vice Chair Sabrante, Sandy Lyon,
Aye.
Karen Monroe,
Aye.
Lupita Alcala,
Aye.
Sue Burr, aye. That's passed unanimously. Thank you all for the discussion. Thank you, Tarina and Josh and others who have been working on the budget. Barbara, we appreciate your help. Remember that we're moving up item number 9 and 10 now in order due to some folks being unable to get here. I am going to suggest that we take a brief break before we start on that. So let's adjourn for about 10 minutes and we'll reconvene at 10:15. Okay, I'd like to reconvene the meeting of the California Collaborative for Educational Excellence. And I believe that we are moving to item number 9, direct technical assistance and update on the Vallejo City Unified School District.
Yes, and so we're very fortunate to have Superintendent Adam Clark here. I think, and then Suji Shin, our Deputy Executive Director, is filling in a little bit today. So Lizette Estrella Henderson, the superintendent, was not able to be here this morning. So she had another emergency come up and was not able to do it. She was excited to be here. We've been working, just a little bit of context too. It really speaks a lot to Adam's leadership. Adam had reached out originally to Josh and our folks last, I think, late spring, as well as the county superintendent, and said, is there any way that, I might be able to get some assistance and get some thought partners and some other folks to the table to try to help structurally around some of the things we want to do in our district too. And so at that time, that was prior to AB 1840. And so we had to request a superintendent. So both Adam and as well as the county superintendent sent a letter and requested that our services. And so the superintendent approved those and so put us in the district. And then we've been in there ever since too. We've had a great relationship. So they're going to share a little bit about what we've been doing this year and then answer any question that you might have.
Good morning, Chair, members. Suji Shin, Deputy Executive Director. And as Tom said, I'm thrilled to be standing up here today talking with you a little bit more about some of our work around our direct technical assistance partnerships, and specifically around our partnership in collaboration with the Vallejo City Unified School District and Solano County Office of Education. So I'm joined here by Dr. Adam Clark, our Superintendent of Schools in Vallejo, and I'll be giving a little bit of background on the Solano County Office of Ed work as well. My role today, I think, is just to frame for you some of the context around this work and really tee it up so that we give Dr. Clark an opportunity to really give you a sense of what this has looked like from the district perspective and how this is felt as one of our newest partnerships around, a new strand of work that we are building out. So with that, as a quick reminder and overview about the direct technical assistance work and specifically around some of the statute that has created this kind of platform for us to work with our districts and county office in this way. Our AB 1840 work is really based on the budget trailer bill that was passed last fall. And that ultimately, at least as it relates to us, changed the structure of how fiscally insolvent districts were administered once the emergency appropriations had been made. And so really shifting that focus from that state-centric kind of administration role into being a little bit more specific to the county office role and their role in the administration, more aligned with our principles around local control, and now assigning some of those responsibilities that were originally assigned to the state superintendent of education down to that kind of local county office. Again, that role around the AB 1840 work does not change fundamentally the goals for supporting our insolvent districts, really focusing on, positive recovery of that district in as short a time as possible, specifically around providing that fiscal stabilization plan, and really then honing in on this academic stability plan, incorporating the work around the LCAP, our local control and accountability plan, to ensure that kind of capacity building at that district end. And then finally, as you see, there's some other AB 1840 provisions that again relate to the county office and the CCE. I think what it really, what I want to highlight here is that in the early years of this process, that what we are looking for as part of this partnership is to really think about how we incorporate some of these principles of recovery, the transitioning to stability, and then growth over time within the district's LCAP, thinking about how we're structuring supports at the county office level, to really provide that kind of scaffolding at all levels for the district as they move towards fiscal recovery. And then ultimately for the CCE, the AB 1840 allows the district to be automatically eligible for assistance from the collaborative. And so that's sort of what brings us to the context for how this relates to our direct technical assistance work. So with that, I wanted to give you a quick timeline of activities. And again, this is, you have this in your handouts. I'm not going to go through point by point, but to give you a sense of over the past year, the kinds of ways in which we have interacted with the county office and the district. And so you see in May, June of 2018 is when we began our initial meetings with Dr. Clark and Superintendent Estrella Henderson at the county office to talk about what a collaboration might look like and to hear directly from the superintendents around some of the needs and the context for the work in Vallejo City and with Solano County Office of Ed. In August, Dr. Clark and Superintendent Estrella Henderson wrote a joint letter to State Superintendent of Instruction Tom Torlakson at the time, requesting access directly to CCEE support. And as a reminder, this was in advance of AB 1840, which passed then in the fall. And so just to say that created sort of a context for us to come in directly to work with the district and the county office back in the summer of last year. And so in October, then we began, so that's the shift from prior to AB 1840 and then the blue in the post AB 1840, talking about the fact that beginning in October, we began to hold ongoing monthly meetings with the district and county office leadership teams to really start taking a look at some of the strategic planning that the district and county office had been engaged in, taking a look at some of their reports and the FICMAT reports, their SACE reports, taking a look at some of their ongoing kind of strategic planning work, as well as their LCAP and the Superintendent Action Plan, and to start working with them around where we saw alignment and potential areas of focus. And so as part of our initial work, the CCE conducted a kind of scan and a crosswalk of all of these kind of strategic planning documents to start to hone in on specific areas of support that the county office might lead with the district without the CCE, and then other areas where the CCE might really provide some of that expansion work to dig in deeper and provide additional support to the county office and district in. You see there then in December, the dashboard data was released. Vallejo City was identified as a result of the 2018 dashboard as eligible for differentiated assistance. So as part of that work, the county office and the CCE worked together to think about how we would incorporate differentiated assistance process as part of our joint work. In April, continued to look at some of our areas of focus around a professional learning plan, incorporating the differentiated assistance work. And as we go into the summer, continuing on some of this work and really thinking over the summer and in the fall around next steps as we dig into our ongoing work around our instructional review. And so I think that's just kind of, again, a broader overview of the cadence of our conversations to date, especially sort of in coordination with our the differentiated assistance work. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Clark to talk a little bit more about Vallejo City, give some context for the district, and then I'll come back in and we'll talk a little bit more about the specifics around some of our joint collaboration work and what that has looked like to date.
Thank you.
Good morning, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Yep, thank you very much, Madam Chair Burr, Executive Director Armelino, and the rest of the board. I'm very honored to be here, very thankful for the support that I've received from CCEE as well as my county office. So and I'm not going to go through a big long story, but I am going to just put some context to my current situation. Was hired to take over the Vallejo City Unified School District in September of 17. Walked into what I had assumed was a $4 million deficit, and once I got in there, realized that it was a $12 million deficit. So immediately we started the reduction process, which is never a easy situation. But at the forefront of everything that I was doing was instruction in the classroom and really serving our students. And so as I began to lay out what our student population is, it sort of puts all this into context. We have 41% Latino, 28% African American, 14% Filipino, which is actually our highest performing subgroup, and then 17% other. Roughly 21% of our students are second language learners, and roughly right around 73% of our students qualify for free and reduced lunch. So our unduplicated count was right around 75%. So, and at many of our schools, the number at those particular schools are up to the low to mid 90s. And so great deal of student needs within the district. You can see our SBAC results from 2018. We had 29% of our students were either met or exceeded standards in ELA, and 19% of our students met or exceeded the standards in mathematics. And so this was really at the forefront of the work that we really wanted to drill down to and to address. But however, there were many things that were sort of taken away from this. Obviously, a $22 million deficit over a 3-year period is nothing to sneeze at. We are currently repaying a state loan. Every year we make roughly a $3.58 million payment from off the top of our budget back to the state. We have been, over the last 20 years, we've been suffering from declining enrollment. We were once a district of 20,000 students, and now we're hovering just below 12,000 students. Many of those students are in neighboring districts, charter schools, or home schools. And so, part of the things that I was set out to do was to bring students back to our schools, and then also keep the ones that we have. However, when you're cutting programs and laying off staff and dealing with safety issues and things of that nature, then it makes it that much more difficult. So during that time, as I was looking for support and resources, a colleague had suggested CCEE. I myself had never personally worked with CCEE, but I was aware of their reputation and was aware of their support that they had provided other districts throughout California. And before coming to Solano County, all of my work had been done in Contra Costa County. So again, not only just learning a new district, was learning a new county. And the demographics of Vallejo are not similar to other districts within Solano County. So I really wanted to reach out to get that support that was very specific to the needs that we had. Obviously, declining enrollment and increased contributions to PERS and STIRS were challenges, but also very high chronic absentee rates. So what I see high chronic absentee rates really affecting is student achievement. If students are not in school, then they're not there to learn. And aside from that, it's causing us a huge financial hit in the amount of money that we were losing through these chronic absentee rates. So again, I was searching for resources. I knew CCEE had a strong reputation of working with struggling districts. We were clearly a district that was struggling. Whether you're looking at budgets, low enrollment, retaining highly qualified staff, and also myself working with a board that was experiencing some challenges. So again, I looked for support with governance, with developing my leaders within the district, and most importantly, improving student outcomes. I know there are lots of different reports that I was also facing. So FICMAC had been in our district. We had also done a special education audit. We were also identified as being significantly disproportionate. So we were putting together a SACE plan, and also we are working through OCR. So just overwhelming. There was just a lot to face, and so I sort of put together sort of a superintendent's action plan after my first year of as I use it as a tool of I was identifying many of the challenges and setting goals within the district, and so I worked. We worked to align all of these different reports and programs, how we could align that with our LCAP and really get to serving our students in a more effective way and improving their outcomes. So again, finding and working through what resources were available through the county office, having that governance support of really working with the board, and we did have turnover in the November election, so the board did change at that time. So that work is continuing. Also developing our own leaders within the district, our cabinet. Many of our cabinet members had been in the district for quite some time. Their whole careers are in the district, and so again having that thought partner of some people who maybe have some different ideas or some different ways to address some of the challenges we were facing was very helpful. And then, just as I said before, tying everything to the LCAP. I wanted that to be the document that we could really rally behind and garner support throughout our community. Use that as a tool and a mechanism to engage with all of our stakeholders, to get them behind the LCAP and really see that LCAP, work to get the resources to the students that were in the most need. I also needed support in developing the MTSS, really identifying ways that as a district we would systemically provide support to our students. We have a very high need student population. In Vallejo, there's we're dealing with housing issues. There's just unrest with some of our communities in terms of with the police department. There's been bankruptcy in the city and the district, things of that nature. So there's a lot going on in Vallejo, and our students come to schools with a great deal of needs. And if we could systemically find a way to identify different ways that we can support our students, I saw that as something that was very important that that I needed support with in developing. We also needed support in communication. What you guys probably know, and what most people in education know, is that most of our problems can be traced back to either a lack of communication, poor communication, or no communication. And so those are that was a major goal that that I had in improving the communication both internally and externally, so that we really could all be on the same page and putting all of our resources and efforts towards meeting the needs of our students. And then also just looking at a long-term professional development plan. What was the plan? We had many programs. We have different successful programs. We have some programs that were being cut by budget cuts, and how could we identify those programs and professional development opportunities that were really having the greatest impact on our staff and students. And then after all that is really getting down to the business of instruction and learning. So throughout this last year, working with CCEE and the Solano County Office of Ed, we have really worked on each and every one of these challenges, and throughout this entire time, there has always been a mindset of capacity building. There's never been that sort of, we were never looking for, for any resources to come in and supplant the, either the personnel or the programs that we have. We had to get ourselves out of some of the challenges, that we were facing. We had to do that, but we needed and continue to need that support in building the capacity in our folks, so that we can, really unify our efforts and resources to the classroom and to student success. And so with the support that I've received from the county office and from CCEE, we are seeing the benefits of that, but it's still needed, and it's still something that that I look forward to, staff looks forward to, attending the meetings and just being able to have a thought partner and then actually have some actions behind it. So specifically, developing this professional development plan is something that is really challenging us to think of ways that we can be mindful with our budgets and with our resources and with our time and our employees on how can we be extra intentional in utilizing those practices that are going to have the greatest impact on our students. So I've included our LCAP goals. I have to say that when I came to Vallejo, we had 10 LCAP goals, and that was, again, that was hard to rally support and to get, the LCAP's already close to 300 pages, and then when you have 10 goals, it was just very, very difficult to talk to stakeholders about those goals. And so our goals are very simple now, but they're very complex. So, just with goal 1, increasing that parent and community engagement. I mean, that's our number one goal, is just to increase engagement. Number 2 is creating that safe and supportive and engaging learning environment. And number 3 is increasing the number of students that we have graduating college and career ready. And so with these 3 goals, it is at the top of all of our communications. It is, it really leads and guides our work. And as we're going through the process, we had a board meeting last night where we were, doing our public hearing on our LCAP. That is what we are, for the last year, and we will continue to focus around and to really, garner that support from our community behind our LCAP goals. But I needed that outside support, that our county office and CCEE was able to provide us in just measuring our stakeholder engagement, in just refining our ways of how we engage with our stakeholders, in measuring the success of our different programs. So these are just some of the, some of the things that we've been working on. Again, there's only so much you can share in a short presentation like this, but hopefully at the end of this that I can open it up to your specific questions, and I can give you some real specifics of some of the things that we've been working on as well.
Thank you, Dr. Clark. So again, around those 3 LCAP goals that Dr. Clark has outlined, the main priority for us this year as a joint collaborative team has been to really think about how we hone in on making sure that there is alignment all the way through the district system processes. So how we align all of our goals around improving student outcomes, and then thinking about the ways in which we are supporting greater engagement at all levels, thinking about kind of culture and practice, and then thinking about kind of specifically around, reducing chronic absenteeism and improving, instruction and learning in the classroom. So with that, I think just as a an overview into this piece again, what we did was start our work in reviewing all of our reports, planning documents on the superintendent's action plan, the LCAP, FCMAT staffing and organizational review, other reports the district had been working on, to really think about how we would examine the alignment of priority areas across all those documents and plans, and identifying gaps in alignment, as well as internal capacity. So really thinking about where do we have kind of, a clear, direct action plan that's in place, that's workable, and that is aligned to all the other priority areas, and where might there be places where there are some gaps, either in the planning aspect of it or in the district's capacity to implement and develop that work. Then, as a joint collaborative team, we worked together over a period of several months to really hone in on some very particular areas of focus for that joint collaboration. And again, this is not to the exclusion of other work that the district is doing by itself or in collaboration with the county office and other collaborators, but really thinking about our CCEE, Vallejo City and Solano County teams to think about where might we have the greatest impact in moving forward sustainable change on the ground at the district level to lead to student outcomes. So we identified these two areas, one around that piece around community engagement and communication strategies, really supporting the superintendent and his leadership team to think about the ways in which they could both prioritize some of the messaging, as well as the platforms within which to do it, the systems within the district and the school offices to really get clear, consistent messaging out to stakeholders, and then also to build in processes by which, feedback from stakeholders, from parents, communities, students, staff could be incorporated back into the planning process. The second area of priority area was around that multi-year professional learning plan for all staff. So really thinking about how we could really work with the district and county office and their leadership teams to think about the ways in which they were aligning instructional goals at all levels for all staff, not just the instructional staff only, but thinking about how that could be targeted over a multi-year process to lead to long-term outcomes, but then how we built in ongoing, assessments and measures to ensure that folks knew, where they were on track to meeting those long-term goals, thinking about how we, again, built in an engagement and feedback process to hear from our teachers, school site teams, parents, and students to get a sense of what was working and how better to really make sure that all these pieces around communication, learning, instruction were tied in together. Anything you want to add to that?
No, I just wanted to, getting the messaging out to our communities. I mean, some of the things in Vallejo are very outdated. So we were still relying on the all-call phone messages on announcing meetings and things of that nature. We were using things like constant contact. Well, that doesn't necessarily reach all of our parents. And, so things like translation services and, other ways like how is it that we can either get information to our parents when there's an emergency on one of our campuses or in some of our surrounding neighborhoods, to how can we communicate progress, or how can we communicate areas of concern for our students. And so that, in a way that may seem simple, but parents and families are so important to all that we do that our communication with them needs to really be outstanding and superb, and it wasn't that. And there isn't just one thing that you can do to change that, to kind of flip that switch. There isn't a magic pill that's going to happen that's going to improve your communication. There was also a great deal of mistrust, even internally within the district and with the community. And so really trying to bridge those gaps is it's time consuming, and it's very complex. And so how do we communicate goals from our LCAP to a community that doesn't trust the district, or How do we communicate goals of an LCAP to employees who may not trust one another? And so that's just an example of why this type of support is so important in moving a district, forward.
So I will try to fill in for Superintendent Estrella Henderson and give, again, a little bit of that perspective from the county office side into, again, as we identify those areas of focus, the perspective of the county office and who they are and their relationship to this work. So again, you have in front of you around who is a SCO, and the Solano County Office of Education supports 6 school districts serving over 64,000 students and really spanning, districts that are communities that are semi-rural, suburban, and urban. Again, that high-level overview of the work of the Solano County Office of Ed, they really do think of their work in advocating for equitable resource allocation and alignment, that real focus that they have at the county office around prevention, early intervention, thinking about the provision of responsive district and school support, and recruitment and retainment of high-quality employees. So a lot of their focus and that perspective is what they've brought into this work as well. The county office really came into this partnership with 3 sets of goals, as Superintendent Estrella Henderson and her team would outline, in that they are really, were focused on thinking about how they drove towards positive student outcomes, a real focus on systems development and alignment, as well as the provision of ongoing support. So I think you can see there a really clear kind of alignment of the way that the CCEE also approaches this work as well. They've really come in their areas of accomplishment and areas of growth for this partnership, as they would say, is that they have a real focus on their professional development, and they've brought in their professional development team to really participate heavily in this collaboration and work very directly with Superintendent Clark and their leadership team at the Vallejo City office. Really thinking about collaboration across all the teams. Again, that systems development and alignment, which I think, we're all sort of really thinking about how we expand and develop that further, supporting the LCAP work. And as we're right now really digging into that development and then ultimately implementation of that multi-year professional learning plan that focuses on getting to, clear, good first instruction in the classroom and how we measure growth on student outcomes towards that end on an ongoing basis.
Suji, I'm going to suggest maybe we jump to slide 21.
Sure.
Is more specific around some of the work that was done, and then give the board some opportunity to ask questions.
Sure. Great. So I think, again, I'll tee this up and then I'll let Superintendent Clark finish it off, is our joint partnership activities have really been along these 2 lines that you see here. So on that left-hand side, some of the communication and engagement pieces. We have focused there really sort of top down as it gets lighter to darker around kind of more immediate one-off support to deeper, more ongoing support. Around some immediate needs that the district had around messaging and communication support, especially around the LCAP, around some of the pieces they had around chronic absenteeism, trying to think about projecting around enrollment for their early grades going into next year. Thinking about some of the communication systems review and a development plan to really think about how we built out more robust systems for communication, feedback, and engagement across the district. And then really getting into this idea as we're just beginning around what does a stronger, more robust communication and engagement system across the district look like, and what implementation supports are needed to really embed that into the fabric of the district. On the professional learning and support side, thinking about that first piece around how we develop a multi-year professional learning plan that is aligned to student outcomes across grades, districts, across grades, schools, content areas. thinking about what does the leadership development need to look like to be aligned to that and better support that on an ongoing basis throughout the year and over the next several years. And then thinking about, as we're just getting into, what does ongoing implementation support for stronger professional learning look like over time? And how do we then build that kind of sustainability at the district and county office levels to really keep that ongoing, over the course of this work? You see in the middle there that all of this is focused around this core of alignment to good first instruction, with this idea that over the course of this work, we're working with the district and county office to think about what ongoing coaching and mentoring resources are needed to really continue this kind of deepening the support, the implementation of planning and implementation at the district, school, and classroom levels, as well as at the district office, thinking about how we develop and structure better systems to keep this ongoing outside of this collaborative work.
I just in closing, just want to say it's all centered around teaching and learning for our students, but it's also teaching and learning with our adults. And the more that we build capacity in our district office folks, and build capacity in our site leadership, then they can support the teachers in the classroom who are having the greatest impact on students. And so with that, we'll open it up to questions if you have some.
Yeah, thank you very much. Very helpful. Congratulations to you, and kudos for taking on what is very challenging work in a community that desperately needs all the help we can provide it. So I'm going to ask my colleagues if they have any questions, and I'll have a couple at the end. Tim.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Clark. I know you're coming into a challenging situation. Sounds like a lot of great work is taking place working with CCEE and the county office. Couple questions. First, just wanting to understand the role that teachers have had up to this point. It sounds like a lot of work has been done, so just want to get an understanding a little bit more about what role teachers have had up to this point. And then as the systemic instructional review moves forward, how do you plan on engaging the association and other teacher leaders at the sites moving forward?
Great question. Teachers are the ones who, as I said before, are going to have the greatest impact on students. However, if we don't have systems in place to really support our teachers, then all their energy and work is going to be wasted going in different directions. And so to answer your question specifically is that we have not yet engaged our teachers in this planning process, but as we begin to roll this out, we will definitely be, we'll be engaging our teachers. We have, I've brought Suji around to several of our schools. We did go visit classrooms. We did go and visit some teachers and talk to several teachers during our visits. But in this planning stage, the teachers have not necessarily been involved at this level just yet.
Well, and I understand that you need to put systems in place, and some of the engagements can involve cabinet and site administrators. But I would submit that to really get that buy-in, and getting the teachers involved even at the planning stage is really important, because they're the ones that at the end of the day, everything you do, and you said it in your closing comments, everything that happens up here, you have to be thinking about what does this look like in a second grade classroom as a teacher is delivering instruction to their students. And there's a lot of expertise within your district in terms of those classroom instructors. So, I understand, some of the planning, is not necessarily going to involve them, but I would submit that they really need to be an integral part of the planning moving forward, because I think, especially when it comes to professional development, they're going to understand, in terms of their experiences, to meet district goals, to be able to give some of that feedback, and just to be really engaged in the process. I think that's where you're going to have your greatest success moving forward. So I would encourage Suji and the county office and Dr. Clark with your team to figure out ways that you can really involve them in this, because the more people are involved, I think that's where you're really, communication to the external parents and community is really important, but that two-way communication, listening and, giving that with your employees and the associations, I think is really going to help you with your long-term goals.
So just to be clear, with our stakeholder engagement around the LCAP, our teachers are some of our greatest stakeholders, and so we have had a big focus on getting our teachers engaged in this process. And so actually, when we talk about communication, I'm talking internal and external, and a lot of the internal communications that we've had with our employees has improved. And actually, we had more teacher responses and more input on our LCAP this last year than we've ever had. So
that's encouraging.
So definitely, I agree with what you're saying, but they are definitely involved in the communication. When I talk about that communication, it is coming from our, having those two-way communications between district office and classrooms.
Right.
And so I appreciate your comments, and that is something that we are focusing on and will continue to do so.
Right, and student engagement as well. I mean, so a lot of the students, as you do those surveys, I think they can give some valuable input as well. So as you do the instructional reviews moving forward, I would encourage you to continue to do that and look for opportunities. So thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments? Karen?
Well, thank you so much for the presentation. The colorful slides and the overview really, don't tell what deep work this is and what challenging work this is. So I really appreciate you taking the time to share the journey so far. I have two things. One is looking at your LCAP goals, and what stuck with me is you said that you've been working on measuring these or coming up with measurements. So I wanted to know if you could tell me a little bit more about that, because I think that as those who work with these LCAP plans, that goals are sometimes easy to make, but actually figuring out the impact of those goals can be quite challenging. So I'm just, I won't even say lessons learned, I'll say lessons you're learning on the way as you seek to measure that. So I'll ask you that first.
Okay, so if I had the answer on how to measure impact of the LCAP, I'd probably be writing a book right now and doing definitely some professional development. But what we've looked at is things such as engagement. Was one of the things that we looked at was looking at our engagement strategies with the LCAP. So looking at the number of meetings that we held, looking at those attendance rates at those meetings, looking at the parent surveys that we've had returned to us, student surveys, employee surveys. I mean, those are one of the ways that we sort of measure that goal one of our engagement, of how our stakeholders are engaging within the LCAP. When we're looking at safe and engaging environments, we're specifically looking at our attendance rates. Not only for our students, also for our employees. We actually have a very high employee attendance rate that that we also want to address, and we also see this LCAP as a way of addressing those employee attendance rates. And then again with looking at graduating more students college and career ready, we're looking at our local assessments, which we've revamped over the last year and a half, and also at our at our more statewide, more standardized assessments as well. And then also doing some surveys with our high school students and really getting some of the feedback from them about the type of courses that they would like to take and the type of support that they're receiving at their schools. So those are just a couple of the ways that we're measuring the success of our LCAP or how our LCAP is being perceived by our stakeholders.
Thank you for that. And then the last question is, I can see that you've narrowed your focus to community engagement and professional learning. And I'm just, and this could be for Suji too, really interested as one who does this support work and one who talks to colleagues across the state about, okay, so what are we learning and how do we help other folks implement these learnings, which I see as a huge opportunity for CCEE and a place where CCEE sits. So I appreciate the examples that you gave of certain tools that you were implementing for example, around communication. I'm just wondering going forward, and I don't know that we have the answer yet, but how we're thinking about taking the learnings from what we're doing around 1840 or differentiated assistance and actually saying, here are the steps and tools that we engaged in. This is what made a difference. And, because CCEE can't be everywhere and all things to all people. So how we're thinking about making those tools accessible as we're thinking about Vallejo in specific.
Member Monroe, welcome to our board. I think, what you'll see, I'm excited actually because this has been a real topic of conversation for our team as we move into kind of planning for this next year. And, I think our first 3 years, a lot of this work has been, addressing kind of the initial implementation of our work, our changing kind of, mandates around what we do and who we serve and how we do that work. I think as we go into this, a key part of our work plan is now focused on how we translate our lessons learned and our ongoing lessons that we are learning into tools, resources that are more immediately accessible. So, we have really amped up our work around just communicating more and more frequently about what it is that we're doing, getting information out there so that we can in turn then receive feedback around where folks are interested, what folks want to learn more about, how we might want to dig into certain aspects of the work that we're doing, but then also translating a lot of our work and, even just the resources that we develop around specific tools that might be something, a way that we've used to measure growth around professional learning plan development in Vallejo City, and just putting that up as an accessible resource that anybody can take down and look and understand, what has been used and why, so providing some of that context around it. And then, thinking more deeply about how we can provide some more of that kind of research and context background for what we've built out, the why we've done it, what it's looked like in certain places, especially some of our tools that we are anticipating using in multiple places. So some of our continuous improvement work, our systemic instructional review as we start to build that out and use it and implemented it with some of our district partners to really think about how that is not just a standalone resource, but something that comes with some context around, where it's worked, why it's worked for whom, and how you might be used in, X district or X school.
And if I could just share just real briefly is that, one thing that Superintendent Estrella and I discussed along with Suji is also sharing our experiences out, CSBA conference or superintendent's symposium, things of that nature, is going out and talking about this. I think, it was brought up earlier about getting away from the No Child Left Behind. And this has really been a system of support. And I think when you see a district, a struggling district, working with the county, working with a state agency, and having it be a collaborative effort, working to improve student experiences and not the necessarily punitive way that things have been done in the past. I think this is a great way to get it out there so that people would be more, more open and willing to embrace in this type of collaborative relationship.
I just wanted to make a quick comment. I have quite a few thoughts, but I think your specific question about lessons learned, right, and getting those resources out. One of the things we've focused on here the last couple of years, and this year in particular, is around our toolkits, right? And our toolkits are really focused around areas around the LCAP. We're looking at shifting some of that next year to actually have toolkits around some of the work that we're doing, right? And so, for example, we're doing it right now in our pilot districts where we've just finished up with them. We're in the middle of the development right now of a toolkit around what do we learn, so those resources, so that we can share those. It's similar to around our professional learning networks. We've been having this conversation around this 1840 piece. The thing that won't surprise you, and won't surprise, I think, anybody, is how slow this work is, right? It is not, Adam's working his tail off, right, every day, right, in places where there's a whole lot of things on fire, right? And not a lot of resources and anything functioning real well. So it's very difficult, right, to try to go in and shift those things, right, while you're still running every day, trying to do the other pieces too. And so I think for all of us, we're never as far as we want to be, right? Can't seem to implement as quick as we want to be able to implement. We have to bring in more stakeholders. We have to engage more of the other folks. We need to do things, I think, a little bit more from the bottom up, right? From schools back towards it and trying to figure this whole work piece out. So in truth, right, I think we have some initial things that we're sharing around the relationships and kind of how to approach it. One of the things I can tell you we're learning in everywhere we go, where we're really trying to do some real technical assistance, is the systems are just not in place to support learning, right? They're just not there, right? And not that folks don't want to, everything from leadership capacity to some systemic practices to data systems to some professional development. There's a lot of things happening, but they're fairly disconnected. And so we're trying to figure out how to get our hands around that first to try to determine what is. And that takes a little bit of time. And that seriously, I think, is similar to what we experienced here this year too, of really trying to get a good sense of really what it is and then what are we really going to go after. So we have some more work to do there.
Sandy, do you have any questions or comments? I don't want to leave you out down there.
I was going to echo, I don't know if you can hear me, so it's hard for me to participate because I'm not clear what you see, but I want to echo what Tom said, and I really appreciate Dr. Clark's approach and what he said earlier about the LCAP goals seem simple, but they're complex. And I think that is the challenge. And we know we really want everyone focused on continuous improvement, and measuring those achievements continues to be a struggle, I think, particularly with the LCAP. And there's an opportunity as you're redoing the LCAP this year to really look at what you've learned and what you want to focus on for the coming 3 years. So good work, and I'm glad that we're partnering with you, and we'll be eager to hear how these endeavors work out for all of you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sandy. So just a couple things for me, just on the issue about lessons learned, and I think you were touching on this. It strikes me, I didn't know we didn't get to every single slide, but districts that are in fiscal distress face, I don't have to, I'm like preaching to the choir here, face a whole nother set of circumstances, right? They have trustees, their board authority can be limited, et cetera. So I think especially since we've kind of been set down squarely into the assistance efforts with these districts, we have to, it would be helpful, I think, to distinguish as well about what things work well there, what you have to be attentive to, that districts that aren't in this circumstance might not have to think about, hopefully. So just one suggestion. The second one is about, and Karen touched on this, is sort of change in outcomes. I know you have test scores back from this last round of testing, and I didn't know if you'd had a chance to look at that to see if any of your work is reflected in that. I'm just curious about that. And the last thing I will say, and it reminds me when Tom was talking about how hard the work is, our former board president, Mike Kirst, had a great phrase that we repeat over and over and over again, which is patience, persistence, and humility. Because it is very hard work. You have to be patient and not jump to conclusion, and humble about what you're learning and how that can help improve the system. So I just offer that as something that runs around in my head all the time, but just curious about the student outcomes.
Yeah, so I have been studying those test scores. I know them by heart. And as I think going back to what Tom said is that this takes a lot of time. So, I mean, in a nutshell, I have some schools that made some great gains, and I have some schools that stayed the same, and I have some schools that fell back a little bit. And then when all that, because when you look at our overall, when you look at that 29% ELA and that 19% math, that's not reflective if you look at per school. But the overall scores of the district are still similar with we actually, math was a major focus, and we did see a slight increase uptick in math this year. However, I'm very, very pleased with with some of the gains that happened at some of our schools where they've really struggled, where there's been turnover in leaderships, there's been just lots of things that have happened there, and they have shown some progress. So literally about half of our schools improved, and about 25% of the others sort of just took a slight dip. And when we're talking a dip, I'm talking just not even a whole point, maybe a couple percentage points, and some remain flat. But there was some improvement, and there was more improvement in math than there was in ELA. So I kind of take that as a real thing, because that's something that lots of people struggle with math. So we did see that with our CAAASA data, with our SBAC data, and things like suspension data has gone way down. I mean, I was just reviewing that yesterday, and so as we break for the summer, and we do our PD, it's really okay. What happened here? How did we get here? What worked? What didn't work? What are we going to just push forward with? And what are we going to stop doing? Because we don't have the resources, we don't have the time, and because of so many challenges, we have to really be intentional with what we're doing, because our students can't wait.
Thank you. And I don't mean to say that just test scores are the only indicator.
no.
So I appreciate you bringing up,
Yeah.
because, we've tried to do multiple measures, but I do think, and I know all of you have reinforced this notion about how are we affecting student outcomes. It's important to do all of the things that we need to around systems, but if we're not moving the needle for our students, then we need to sort of rethink. I also just want to reinforce what Tim said about teacher participation. I know this is something I think we sort of overlooked at the state level. We were very explicit in the statute about at the front end with LCAP, and it sounds like you're doing a great job with involving teachers, students, parents, et cetera. We sort of forgot it at the tail end around differentiated assistance. We don't have explicit language about that. That's an oversight on our part, but it's certainly something that folks can do on their own, and I would really encourage that going forward. So thank you. Any other comments? I'm going to ask for public comment. Any public comment on this item? Okay, seeing none. Again, thank you so much. I'm so appreciative of your work and really appreciate you being here. And also appreciate the notion of spreading the word that I think it's going to take a lot for people in the field to believe that we're doing things differently, and we really think this can be beneficial to districts and to schools. So appreciate you spreading the word.
Thank you for everything that you all do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we're moving on to item 10, and I'm going to start with Ish, and I'm going to let you explain what that acronym means. It has a whole bunch of A's in it, but it has to do with our professional learning network.
There are a lot of A's in it. Good morning, Madam Chair, Executive Director Armelino, honorable members of the board, Ish Rairu, Director of Continuous Improvement, and I'm really looking forward to being here. I'm only going to be up here for a few moments, but I do get to talk about all of those A's, at least briefly. So as a quick reminder, during our last governing board meeting, we had a spotlight on 2 different professional learning networks. One of them was Butte County Office of Education, and the other was Napa County Office of Education. And I walked through a few slides to describe the setup, and I didn't want to repeat all of those slides this time. Just as a quick reminder, we support 54 professional learning networks. They support deep learning in their local context, referencing the LCAP and the dashboard as tools for improvement. The facilitators from each of those networks meet in something called a professional learning exchange, or a PLX, and they work together as facilitators with a PLX coach that the CCEE funds and supports, to build capacity, to collaborate, and to ultimately try to go back, so that allowing those facilitators to go back to their local context and do the best possible work they can. So one of the PLNs is CAAASA, the California Association of African American Superintendents and Administrators. Their PLN facilitator is represented in the Bay Professional Learning Exchange, or PLX. And it is my great pleasure and privilege to introduce Michael Watkins, who is the president of CAAASA, who is going to be sharing with you information about the work that they do, along with a team of other representatives here from CAAASA. And they will be getting to important points around impact on student-level systems and other key considerations. So with that, unless there are any other questions of me, I was going to bring up President Michael Watkins.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Hi, Michael. It's so great to have you back.
So I didn't think I would be back, but here I am. So it's been great working with CAAASA, so I'm glad to be able to share that with you today. I also have with me the Executive Director of CAAASA, Dwight Bonds, and you will also hear from Edwin Javius. He has been the facilitator with Ed Equity, and the Edwin's back there. You'll also hear from Joshua Schultz, the CBO with NAPA. He's also been part of the process. And also Dr. Janet Scholes, the Pittsburgh Superintendent of Schools. They'll be up shortly. Good morning, Madam Chair, Board, Armelino, Executive Director Armelino. Again, it's a pleasure being back before the board. I never thought I would be in this capacity before you, but I think the work that CAAASA has done has been extraordinary in this statewide PLN. You know, I had a small PLN in Santa Cruz County, which I was part of, and I saw some good work there, but to bring all these different 4 districts and 3 county offices together over a 2-year period was really impressive. And so I was on the periphery pretty much. As a president, I didn't go to all of them, but I had an opportunity to see many of them. And you have a copy of this report, a sample report in front of you. We're just going to summarize that report for you today, okay? With that, I'm going to go ahead and begin. Let me just say one thing. These networks took place across the state: Napa, Pittsburgh, San Diego, Orange County, all over Oakland, Alameda. So it was impressive to see everyone participate. Okay, which one do I move? Oh, the other mouse here, okay. Erica, I never say, come on. All right, that one, Erica, thank you. Okay, you asked what CAAASA is. I've been a 10-year member of CAAASA. And I've been president for 1.5 years now. Dr. Clark is also a member of CAAASA, and as well as Dr. Monroe over here. So thank you both. And you have big shoes to fill, Karen. I mean, so, no, I'm just kidding. That's a joke. That's a joke. Anyway, we are a group of educational leaders committed to identifying and addressing the critical issues in education through public policy relative to the status and performance of African American students in California. As you know, African American students are probably the lowest subgroup in California. And it's not just in California, it's across this nation. And we have been committed to trying to address this issue systemically and through working with leaders and working with teachers, and that's what we do. In fact, when we talk about resources provided by CAAASA, we provide professional development programs for teachers and administrators. We provide equity-focused webinars and white papers. We will have Dr. Pedro Nagara speaking with many of our leaders on this particular document in June in a webinar. So he'll be doing it. We'll get the information to you. But I think just to get this information out to the public is really important. We provide mentoring for African American superintendents and aspiring district and school site leaders. Adam Clark, Dr. Clark, actually was an aspiring leader when we started these trainings, and I'm pleased to see how successful he is in Vallejo in a very challenging district. So, Dr. Clark, congratulations again. We provide equity for school training for school districts and county offices, primarily working with CAAASA and AAASA on these equity trainings. So we're not working in a vacuum. We try to bring others into the fold. Want to bring the CD into the fold at some point in time, so we may be coming back and talking with you. I know Dwight has been talking with Tony as well. We provide statewide health and equity workshops, and we have an annual conference and regular convenings. Our annual conference was held in Anaheim last month. We had over 800 participants, including students. It goes through Tuesday through Friday. We had over 200 students participate on Tuesday for trainings and workshops and learning, and over 600 participants. And that's really going to be one of the more premier conferences, I think, in the state. So with that, I'll turn it over to, before I get to the others, I'll turn it over to Dwight Bonds right now. Dwight?
Thank you, Mike. Madam Chair and board members, it is my pleasure to be here before you again. I've been before just talking about CAAASA and the extraordinary work. And first of all, I just want to thank the board for the whole concept and for putting out the RFA for the CCEE PLNs. When we first saw the proposal, we got very, very excited about it because, as you know, or as Michael has indicated, that African American students have the same challenges where you're in a rural area are in an urban setting. And so we decided to purposely and intentionally have a PLN that was statewide. And so when we got together as our group, we began looking, when the PLN persons came in, well, back up. When I first reached out to the superintendents, they were very excited about it, very appreciative, and they actually identified, I think, some of the best possible participants we could have asked for. They were very much engaged, and so our first meeting when we got together in Los Angeles at Laco boardroom, we began to think and talk about this network and what this may mean. And CAAASA, our focus is on African American students and those students of color, and that was in our initial proposal. But the PLN structure was to be sure that the work is led by the PLN participants, that they actually help kind of chart the path. And so they determined that they want to focus on African American students exclusively because of the challenges they were facing in their own district with the data, with the reports, with the LCFF and other kind of challenges. They said, we need to really address this here and kind of focus and hone in our attention to this here. And so it was my surprise because we were really prepared as CAAASA to look at a much larger concept, but we were very, very pleased with this here. It also kind of captures the spirit of Congressman Augustus Hawkins. As you know, Gus Hawkins was the first African-American congressman west of the Mississippi, and he was a long-range congressman here in California. Congressman Hawkins, at one point in time, made a very important statement. He said that Black students are the proxy which ails U.S. education today. And when you form and fashion solution for these students, you form solutions for all students. And that premise has held true throughout our CAAASA as well as through many other operations. So we're very excited about the work that's been done through this here. I'm going to jump to the next slide, actually. I'm going to slide number 6 here, which then looks at just who was involved in our PLN. We had 3 outstanding county Office of Education, Napa County Office of Education, Los Angeles County Office of Education, and San Diego County Office of Education. All 3 superintendents were very much engaged in the RFA process and identifying and selection of the PLN participants. We also had 4 exceptional school districts. Pittsburgh, which you'll hear from Janet Schultz very soon. We had Compton Unified School District, Linwood Unified School District, and Fresno Unified School District. So we had, I think, one of the most exciting PLN. Michael said we traveled throughout the state. Great things were happening. And before I give back to Michael, one of the things that was very important was our superintendents of these districts chose to be a part, and whenever they could, come in and listen in and be a part of the actual hearing, the thinking, and the information. And I think it was Janet came actually with some of her board members, Dr. Schultz, and her board members said, "This is so great. Are you documenting? Are you getting this information in a way that others can see it and learn from it?" And so this helped us to create this report.
Okay. Now at this point in time, I'd like to invite Edwin Javius, Dr. Schultz, and Josh to come up forward. And we'll take questions at the end.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members. My name is Edwin Javis. I was the facilitator of the CAAASA PLN, and it was a great excitement for 2 years to really support the work of the PLN. And it was interesting, and as Dwight indicated, we started off with a really broad stroke of how do we work with all kids, and then with the group here from the county and the district and the dashboard data really drove us to a really specified problem of practice. And that was the achievement and discipline of African-American students. So we undertook the kind of the Carnegie improvement science methodology of drilling down to figure out what are some of the root causes and lesson learned and learning to address the issues. So this presentation, we're going to talk a little bit about barriers, but really from a different perspective, because as we dug deeper into the data, we started to uncover some real systemic issues that were trends that we want to share, and also share some solutions as well. Again, our PLN was very structured like many other PLNs. And again, as Ish indicated, that of the 54 PLNs, Our PLN was probably the only one that really specified to one subgroup. So that was very unique for us. And that really gave us an opportunity to go deeper as opposed to really taking months to find out what would be the problem of practice. So in our structure, we met once a month face-to-face, traveling across California. We have a lot of Southwest points, as well as the virtual meetings. And for my role was kind of like herding cats, because you had some really dynamic folks in the room with strong opinions, and really start to utilize that resource. And we came up with some really good work. Again, thanks to Dr. Schultz, is that her board member really challenged us to say, what are you doing with it and how will you share it? So when you guys are going, what are going to be the artifacts that others can use to see what were some barriers and what were some solutions? So what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about the barriers that you've probably have known and saw, but it's interesting when we did our improvement science work, and I think Tim talked a little bit about the student voice part, and we did a really strong piece of talking to kids, African-American students, about what were some of the issues that you're facing in school. And we tried to focus a lot of our work around 8 o'clock to 3 o'clock, because we know the systemic change is going to take place from 8 o'clock to 3 o'clock in the classroom. So again, we utilized the dashboard as well as other indicators to identify really what we already knew, that African-American students' education or achievement was low, and they were disproportionately being referred, suspended, and so on and so forth. So just dig it, but we wanted to dig down deeper. So we found out 5 key things that really, and I know this may sound negative, but it was the lesson learned from this that's going to help us. And we talked a little bit about the quality of instruction and engaged, and how do we improve first instruction, i.e. the MTSS model. It's going to be the first quality instruction for all kids, but specifically for African-American kids. One of the things we found out, and the superintendents and folks who have engaged in this work around looking at African-American education, is the internal and external politics. Knowing that African-Americans are probably single digits in most of our schools, and Vallejo, I know, is almost 20%, but allocating resources to specific groups with low percentages, there's some politicking to that. And we found that was real critical for our superintendents to have the language and the courage to deal with the internal and external politics. Again, in the classroom, going to the classroom level, there were some biases that were going in what the kids would say. They felt that teachers didn't like them. And that became a trend, if you will. So that relationship piece became a real critical piece, and the leadership. When we spoke to the principals of the districts, giving them common language to talk about some of the internal, external politics, we found that they lacked some of the language to really create a critical why for this specific subgroup, if you will. And that subgroup became now all kids, but when you did all kids, it seemed like African-American kids were still suffering from an academic standpoint. And the most critical thing that we found as a challenge was the system. And Dr. Clark talked about getting the system fixed, but also having the system do a critical analysis of itself as being a barrier. And that was very hard for the system to put a mirror up to their practices as well. So looking at closing some of those holes in the system is some things that we found. Again, I'm going to turn it over to the superintendent of Pittsburgh, and we're going to talk about some of the promising practices that we found that we really want to get your take on.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Janet Schultz, the very proud superintendent of Pittsburgh Unified School District. And thank you for this opportunity, and thank you for CAAASA for asking us to be part of this PLN. I can't emphasize enough the quality of the professional development that we receive as a district specific to African American achievement and the opportunity gap that we receive from CAAASA, whether it's being part of this PLN or attending their conferences. And so the PLN is really beneficial, hoping that's going to continue in the sense that we get that cadre of other district folks form relationships. So my folks who are participating are getting professional development at the same time as we're looking at our district system issues. When we each host, we're getting that benefit of having people from other districts look at our classrooms, look at our problems of practice, and give us feedback as well too. So there's lots of benefits along with the promising practices that I want to make sure I highlighted as well too. And one of the things that we were able to share from Pittsburgh is an implementation of an early warning indicator. And so we started a way of collecting our data to say what we noticed in drilling down, in particular with our African American students, is the upper elementary was where we started to see the gap widen. We have in our early literacy, in our early grades, we have on par or in some schools exceeding their African American achievement. But when we get to the 4th, 5th grade and then junior high, we see the gap start to widen. So we started looking at early warning indicators around attendance. And when we say attendance, we're taking into consideration loss of instructional time. So we're looking at referrals out of the classroom, suspension rate, so loss of instructional time, besides just missing school for a family reason with that, and also the numbers of discipline referrals and anything with our own internal assessments besides the state assessments. So that way we can identify earlier and make sure that we have students on our radar and put some systems in place through our MTSS and our cost team where we have the service providers come around the table to say what can we do, offer expanded learning, things like that. So that was something that we really were able to share and get feedback on from the group. And I know the culturally responsive literacy program was another district, but we were able to learn from that as an example. So that was from Fresno. And so it was great for my folks to be able to go to Fresno, see what they're doing with that. And just to give you an example, so they were looking at summer reading and getting books that were more interesting for the students and culturally relevant for the students. So that impacted my district, even though it was a best practice from over there, so that we had student input into as we refresh our literacy and our reading and our book and our summer programs as well too.
And another thing is, it's interesting to that program that they're now building capacity through the school day, is that all of the materials were Afrocentric materials. All of the teachers were African American. And we did interviews with the kids afterwards, and how do I say, the efficacy of having folks and reading materials really kind of bolstered their resiliency. So that was a promising practice that we can drive back into the school year. So that was real critical as well. In addition, in LACO, social emotional learning and was implemented. And it was interesting that the discipline data was going down for every single group for social emotional learning for discipline. However, when we did a test case with a group of kids and we added a cultural and racial piece to the social emotional learning, it really decelerated the behavior of African American students. So that was a very promising practice of adding that element to the social emotional learning so kids could have positive racial identity development, which really supported their academic incognition. So that was something that was very promising. We had about 10 other promising practices, but we wanted to give you really 3 that was highlighted, and we want to continue those promising practice if we get the grant. No, just kidding. And it's interesting that I hear Dr. Clark talks about the learning environment. And I'm going to just go a little bit deeper of our key findings of the learning environment for African American students. And a lot of African American students told us in the empathy interview from the improvement science is that it was not safe for them racially in the classroom. And what do I mean by that? They felt that they had to be right every time because they were probably the only one in the classroom, especially when we talk to kids in AP classes, in higher order classes. So when we talked about a learning environment that's safe, is it culturally and racially safe for kids to make mistakes? And a lot of our kids felt they were not able to make mistakes in higher order classes. So which really drove them in an enrollment standpoint to not to go into AP, if you will. So we're talking to teachers about how do you make the classroom safe linguistically, culturally, and racially. That's what we found out in our key findings. And also that many principals struggled with using common language to bring teachers along, especially when we disaggregated the dashboard data and the CAAASA data. We do it by culture, race, and so on and so forth. They didn't have the language to facilitate their staffs around that. So they stayed away from it, if you will. So again, giving them the language to facilitate that conversation. And I'm going to turn it over to Josh, but one of the things that Dr. Edwards from Lakeland talked about is that a lot of the equity work is mutually exclusive in all the other departments, and they're in the silos. So you'll have your curriculum instruction doing this, you'll have student services doing this, and then you'll have an equity department that is not connected to those entities. So that really created a problem in terms of just communication and articulation.
Hi, Josh Schultz, Deputy Superintendent CBO with the Napa County Office of Education. And you know, I have to say that when our superintendent, Dr. Barbara Nemko, first came to me and said, you know, Josh, I told Dwight Bonds that we're going to participate in this PLN, and I'd like you to represent us. I was a little surprised that Napa was even selected in the first place. And you know, I have to confess, in my role, I'm pretty far from the classroom, and you know, I'm pretty far from the sites, but you know, what was going on for African American students was not a focus of my work in Napa County. And that's partly because Napa County has only about 2% of the students are African American. Only one of our 5 districts has enough African American students to actually show up on the dashboard indicators. And I think because of that, and you know, the outcomes were hidden somewhat. They weren't front and center in the work that we were doing in supporting districts. But you know, unfortunately, of course, when you look at the data, you know, the gaps in access and opportunity that are leading to poor outcomes for students are evident there, just like they are in most of the places in the state and in the nation. So it was a wonderful opportunity for me to come in and work with this group and learn, you know, dive deeply into the challenges that African American students are facing in our systems, and to learn about some of the things that our colleagues around the state are doing to address these challenges. So one of the things that we ended up starting to do in Napa County, and you heard at your last meeting from Lucy Edwards, who is the facilitator of our local PLN, Dr. Edwards, as of last week, she just defended her dissertation, you know, we spent a lot of time in that PLN focusing on developing the language and the skills to communicate data and getting our districts to be comfortable in really looking at data at the local level, disaggregated all the time. And as we developed systems and methods of doing that, and at the comfort level and the trust to do that, it became easier for our districts to look at the data, look at each other's data, to share what was going on, even in their local, you know, formative assessments and et cetera. And of course, when that's placed in front of you in a disaggregated way over and over and over again, it's pretty hard to ignore that there are some challenges for certain groups that obviously are not being addressed. And you know, one little win that we got out of that, for instance, is, and none of our districts have been identified for differentiated assistance for African American students thus far. But despite that fact, you know, we got one of our districts that has the largest population to really focus in certain ways, and for example, put explicit goals for decreasing suspensions for African American students into their LCAP, to raise it to the level of awareness with their community. Another way that this work has really helped me to shift my thinking is, by virtue of the fact that I've been in the county office for a long time now, I was around the advent of LCFF and LCAP, got involved in a lot of the work that CAAASA did in trying to respond to that and the new role for county offices. Have the great joy of now chairing the committee that does the CAAASA LCAP approval manual, something that Tarina used to do years ago. All that is to say, I've had a lot of conversations with a lot of people around the state around LCFF and LCAP and differentiated assistance and how that's working and where the challenges are. Find it very unfortunate that there's this categorical mindset that still sticks out there around using LCFF resources to address student needs. And so, I've had conversations with districts where they believe that their county office has told them they cannot use LCFF resources to address the needs specifically of African-American students. Or they believe that on their own, even if their county office didn't tell them, because they're not unduplicated students per the regulations. That's unfortunate. In my humble opinion, it's ridiculous. And so I have a little bit of a voice, in these discussions with my colleagues around the state. So trying to get the message out there that these are unrestricted resources. And if we really believe that LCFF is about focusing on equity, and your data says that there's a particular group of students here who are not being served well, then of course you need to focus resources on that in order to get better outcomes. Dwight.
Sorry, I was on the. I had next steps. I'm sorry.
Okay, I'll do that. I'll do this one then. Okay, I have two more slides for you. Okay, so recommendations to intentionally integrate equity efforts across all operations. I am working with, in my previous life as a county superintendent, I think it was illuminated in many circumstances on equity, and I think that hopefully that work is continuing with county superintendents, the ones I speak with periodically. I know it is, so I'm glad to see that's integrated there. We want to prioritize regular equity trainings and walks and summits. I think that's important in school districts, in schools. We want to explicitly target LCFF and additional state funds toward African American students. I think that the neglect is historical and somewhat pervasive, in cultural in the society. And I think that to not address it or to minimize it is in my opinion, a disservice to that African American student population and in society in general. And lastly, to purposely use data for system accountability. The data, we have the data is there. We're looking at strategies now to really try to improve the educational outcomes for this population. So those are some more recommendations. And we have one more slide, and I'll have Dwight take that one, and then we'll take questions.
Thank you, Michael. One of the things that I don't know, should we mention that CAAASA has established meaningful statewide partnerships. For over 6 years since the Brown versus Board of Education 60th anniversary, we formed a partnership with over 11 state agencies, from CDE, from AXA, from CCEEE, from CTA, from CSBA, from SEPTA, and many others. And we've been working together on the issue of addressing these African American students of color. So our statewide summits and conference are planned with all these groups coming together, sharing and presenting and bringing about new research and some new information. So when it comes to where we are today, when it comes to the report you have in front of you, we're really excited about the Equity in Action report. We're also looking at the dissemination process that would definitely include working with our statewide partners and ensuring that they receive copies. All the districts and the county office will also get copies of the report. What you got now is still a draft. We got a really shiny copy being finalized, and when we sure the CCEE office has given us its full blessing on the full report before we did a final printing on it. But we think it's very important to recognize that this work includes all of us, and the thinking of all of us, and the resources of all of us. So we have reach out, and we have very excellent partners, and we have very good working relationship with our statewide partners. So that's only one step is getting the report out. Also in there, it talked about the various strategies and recommendation. If it says it in that report, it doesn't do much good for California. So we have intentionally designed our workshops for this coming year to be sure that they're included. We have what's called a Health and Equity Institute. That was a grant funded by the California Endowment. So we do it with CSBA, we do it at the ACTA conference, we do it at California PTA and our conference. So intentionally, we will be sure that this report information is shared with those audiences there also. So besides those two, we also have a key concept of having an equity certification program that's needed for California. You know, equity leaders are around, and we have very good leaders around, but how they got to the point of identifying equity, the training for equity leaders, constantly raising these questions. We've had a discussion with ACTA, we had a discussion also with CCEE to look at how we can really formulate a true equity leadership certification. So hopefully we're working with the California the California certification, we will be able to look at what that needs, and then we can get input from all our state partners. We're also looking at other things that's coming up. Last week we had a meeting here actually looking at the issue of African American students and the need for having that increase. And one of the challenges that come up often is an HR challenge, that these here individuals or applicants may not get have the best interview, or things happen in their process that often they are not selected. So we talked about how HR can have a more equity focus to ensure we're increasing a diverse workforce here in California. So we're also looking at, again, and this is also mentioned in the report. So a lot of things we're sharing and talking about, we have made plans, and we're making plans right now to look at it. We're also hoping, we did submit for the bridge PLN, and we hope if that's also, if we were considered for that, we will go to the next level of this here work.
Okay, at this point in time, we'll just go ahead and take questions. Any questions?
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, Michael, and all of your presenters. Really appreciate it. Questions or comments? Karen?
Well, first of all, as a proud CAAASA member, this is amazing work. It truly is. And I think you're leading in a way that will be a clear example across the state of how this work happens. And you're right, there has been a struggle to really elevate, isolate, and then elevate the needs of African American students across the state. So something I see as an opportunity from where you sit and through this PLN is to actually inventory or catalog these processes, similar to what I mentioned before, but because there are small groups in districts to actually connect people across the state who are trying to do this work in isolation. So I don't know if that's a broader convening through CAAASA with that particular intention or what that strategy would be, but it's certainly something I would be interested in. And something that we have been focused on is really how do you bring those practitioners of color and teachers of color who are already in the profession and those who would join the profession, how do you attract them and then retain them? Because a lot of the challenges we're seeing our students face, our African American students, are also faced by those people who would choose the profession, the barriers of the cost and not being able to have the life supports to do what the teaching profession requires. So I would love to see what you're learning here be applied there. And then the last thing is more of a comment about this equity being everybody's business. So how do we actually get equity out of a silo, the equity department, the one person who has that hat on and everybody says, oh, that's their job, you know, to focus on equity. How do we help people to figure out how to have equity permeate everything that we do in service of all students? Thank you so much.
You want to respond?
I'll address the equity being in the silo and how do you create more capacity is having equity as the foundation of those departments. For example, the MTSS is being rolled out. And right now, the equity has to be part of the foundation of that, as opposed to it being sprinkled, if you will. And having those departments look at all of their work through academics and discipline from an equity lens. So the equity department doesn't become a consultant department. It actually is part of those meetings to have that lens in there and actually having, how do I say, the superintendent, I don't want to say mandate, but having people say, part of this work is equity. Where is that person at the table? So there's going to have to be some intentionality of having those directors and those folks in those departments as well.
And I would add to that too, with the, along with what we do in districts internally, as we get the systems of support in the state and the structures for those supports are very well organized, appreciate how that support comes and the process of it. I would encourage the CCEE to think about who's at the table in each of those support providers, you know, when we're going through differentiated assistance, because in my district in particular, you know, we are 17% African American, and we've had some great gains in some areas like our graduation rates, and we still have disproportionality with our suspensions and our referrals for special education. So as we're going through that process, and again, the system and the structure and the process itself is incredibly helpful. But if there aren't people at the table during that process who have the expertise with African American achievement and are comfortable having those conversations, I feel like we're missing an opportunity to really go deeper through that whole process. And so that is, again, one of the reasons why we as a district were thrilled to join the PLN, because we are getting those conversations through that process, and we would welcome to have them through all of the other processes as well.
Add one more thing, that one of the participants in the PLN was Linwood Unified School District, and I don't know that it's a complete solution to the silo question that you raised, but they have an equity department, but they also have very explicit equity goals in their LCAP, so they've elevated it to a level that I think it's harder for other people to ignore in the organization.
If there are no more questions, Tim, go ahead.
Tim has a question.
Yeah, Lynn, did you want to go first? You go first then. Yeah.
Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to hear and you all present and on such a very important topic. I just wanted to say that the State Superintendent, Tony Thurmond, is incredibly supportive and has actually made closing the achievement gap one of his main priorities for his term. And he's launched his first Achievement Gap work group yesterday, and is very proud of the next couple meetings will hopefully yield some of some complementary alignment with sort of what you've already sort of discovered. He's also put together a couple of panels, and one was about diversifying the teacher workforce and how important it is to get more African American, in particular males, teachers in elementary schools to sort of help support students in that sort of theory of action and change and pedagogy and those needs. I guess my question is, and I'm looking at some of the results from, this is incredibly good work, and I know, and some of the outcome, obviously at the end of the day, it's the outcomes that are going to be really important and are going to sort of solidify sort of the real success around this. How will you measure it in a sort of a, I know it's measured by very locally, right? But holistically, what is the plan is it looking at ELA and math scores? I know that you're concentrating on a region, and with more resources, you'd like to go statewide. And but what is sort of the plan in terms of if you were to grow in the way you'd like to grow and be in places where you need to be? Are you looking at like the statewide ELA and math indicators, suspension rates, the expulsion rates, the attendance, statewide or regionalized? I mean, how do you, because I see some of these in certain areas, but holistically, how will you measure your successes, I guess?
You touched on it. I think that those measures are critical, and I think that they are part of the accountability system that we hold all of the districts to. And so I think the only other piece to that you didn't mention would be the more social emotional piece. And that trauma that many of these students bring to the classroom every day and the family settings, bringing the family, and I know that Adam talked about that. I think those are pretty much the key indicators that we will continue to work with. We love to bring the more families into the situation as well, but I think you touched on what we are looking at, and nothing more at this point in time, actually. Thank you.
I do have some comments, but I do have one question. To what extent are you planning on working with the CSU? Because the CSU system is the backbone for so much of our teacher training and administrator credentialing programs. So many administrators get their credentials through the CSU, and teachers get their credentials through the CSU. So is that part of the next step as well? Because you have so much good research and findings, and I don't know if that's on your radar.
We have been working with Linda Darling-Hammond and the Learning Policy Institute, and with Travis Bristol, and they were very closely worked with us. So, but with the CSUs, I'll let Dwight go ahead and address that one.
Thank you. Well, we've actually been working with Cal State Northridge, which is recognized as one of the institutions that's producing more teachers in the state, as well as Cal State Dominguez Hills. So both, especially the president from Northridge, has been very much engaged in some of the conversations with CAAASA, looking at opportunities. There's a project right now that we have helped to work with in Compton, looking at black male teachers. Again, with Travis Jackson Bristow has actually brought in through a grant process. So we're engaged in these conversations. We're supporting, but we're also looking at some larger opportunities to work with those universities right now.
I think that's great. It's great to hear the work that's already being done, and I think there's even such a greater opportunity because the CSU is the backbone, in terms of, our preparing, our educators. I'm inspired today. I'm so excited to hear this. I'm personally familiar with the work in Pittsburgh, given, being a native and, deep family connections there. So I'm familiar with it there, but to see everything that's taking place, all throughout the state, it really is, it's exciting. And to see the fact, as you're wrapping up your presentation, I'm like, these next steps, and I'm thinking, and then I see that's it. That's exactly, the types of things. Now we get to the implementation piece where you share, the lessons learned, because you guys have done some great work already. And now, putting together a report that isn't going to sit on the shelf, but that you guys are going to actively be working to disseminate, partnering with CCEE and others to make sure that these lessons are carried out. And I couldn't agree more than what Lupita said, that it really does start with that student engagement. I think first and foremost, getting African-American students, high school students and college students to consider careers in education. And then when they get into the profession, working to mentor them as teachers, working to mentor them as administrators. And you talk about Dr. Clark being an example of that. One of your members, now you look at where he is, you look at where Superintendent Monroe is. So it's all part of that, building that pipeline. So again, really exciting. And I would just say, this is really more for Tom, is as in terms of next steps for all of our PLNs, because you hear that was one of the first things we did, and Michael knows this as a board. So we're establish the PLNs. Here we see a clear success story, but sometimes as a board member, you're always wondering, what are the PLNs? What are they doing? And I think I'm hoping that there's some way, as the PLN, as the pilots wrap down, that we're getting some type of reports from the PLNs, and not just reports, but action plans, because I think it's important from an accountability standpoint, for the legislature and the governor and the taxpayer resources that went into this, that we're able to communicate what the clear result is to student outcomes from the work that's done. This is a clear result, but we want to make sure that it's not a one-off and just one anecdotal piece, but that we're getting reports from all of the PLNs, where it can be disseminated through our communications team and on our website and through podcasts, co-branded, where people could see the work the CCE did as well. So I don't know if Tom, in terms of what the plan is to, communicate the work of the PLNs. So.
Yeah, if you don't mind, that's actually, he's just going to speak to that in my report.
Great.
So
Okay.
speak specifically to that, but I do. What you can know, and they referenced this too, maybe lobbied a little bit, but they did a great job with that, and they have lots to show. So we have extended that, right? So we're moving forward, and we've extended it to the folks who already have a PLN, because we recognize there's more work to do around capacity building, okay, right? And so each will speak more specifically to that. We are also looking at some larger statewide issues. So one of the things that we've talked about is that we would like to engage some other stakeholders around some key particular issues in the state, equity being one of those where we participate as well. Our staff participate in it. And part of our role, and Dwight and I talked quite a bit about this yesterday, is bringing those folks together who have some common interests. So, for example, we know the superintendent has some initiatives that he's pushing forward around this, right? That should be tied together. Dwight and I chatted about this. I invited Marguerite Williams from AAASA, who is an equity leader for AAASA, and AAASA is actually doing some of this work around these equity certifications and these trainers. They're also one of our PLNs. So we're having conversations around how do we do a larger PLN around a larger statewide issue to think about where we can go next with this to where it's a little bit more systemic, right? And 3 or 4 districts, right? And take a larger bite at that. So we're in some of those stages in that conversation of how to do that. And we have identified some of our resources around that.
Say hello to Sandy. Sandy, you still there?
I am.
Oh, yes. Hello. How you doing, Sandy?
I'm good. I just want to say a couple quick things. I don't want to reiterate what all of my colleagues have said, that this is great work and it's exciting. As somebody who's presenting our African American Achievement Initiative to the board on Tuesday, it's the work we are all engaged in, and the findings are really powerful. But just a couple things that I wanted to say that the early warning indicator, I'm so excited to see that in there. That's research that's been around for a while. I still don't think LEAs are using it, particularly all the way back to late elementary. And so I think those kinds of things that we can all grasp and can be used again, I think, as was said, with the differentiated assistance, really giving folks in those settings as they're unwinding what their focus is, how to get to some of the support systems that will help them deal with those situations. But the other thing that really struck me was the external and internal politics and the importance of the CCEE, the CDE, the system of support, as well as the statewide, in really messaging all of this solidly about the importance of everyone's role in elevating this as a focus, because I think without that, we are still combating some other perceptions and political issues in districts and with boards that do inhibit us from doing the work that we need to do. So I think that's a really important piece of this, and I'm glad that that was also bubbled up. So excellent work, exciting, and I think it's really going to benefit all of us in the field.
Thank you, Sandy. I also want to mention that Ish and Suji and Josh have been very helpful in this process as well as Tom. So thank you.
Thank you. I'll just say ditto to all of my colleagues. One of the things I want to say that I really appreciated was talking about giving people communication tools to get at this issue and feel comfortable in having the conversations that need to happen. I think that's really critical, and I hope you'll keep working on it. I also want to reinforce what Josh said about these are not categorical programs, people. I know this is hard to get through people's heads, but the resources are available, and if you identify a need in a student subgroup for all, please put your resources to bear on those students who are most at need. So appreciate your work on that, Josh, as well. Any public comment before we move on?
I'm going to try to encourage Marguerite, if she wouldn't mind, to make a public comment, maybe just to share a little bit about how AAASA is approaching some of this work, as well as some of the work around the PLN.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Madam Board Chair, Executive Director Tom Armolino, and other board members. I'm Dr. Marguerite Williams, Senior Director of Equity and Diversity from AAASA. I think this is maybe my 9th month on the job. So I am very excited to be here and want to definitely congratulate CAAASA Board President Michael Watkins and Executive Director Dwight Bonds on the amazing work that they've done. They are excellent partners with AAASA, and we are definitely in it together around moving needle to close the achievement gap for our students. So just want to give a little bit of a frame about how we are leading our equity work at AAASA. In January, we had a focus group come together to kind of advise me on what direction should we go around the work of equity. And it was very clear that everything that we do around equity must tie back to the LCAP and site school plans for student achievement. So I just want to set that as the frame, that everything that we do will connect back to that, because what folks don't want is more of doing extra work, but they're really wanting to make sure that it's integrated in the work that they're already being asked to do. So our theory of action is we believe that if CAAASA supports our district and site leaders to create strong networks of school teams trained that are ready to lead the work in their communities toward more equitable practices, that we will noticeably see improved administrator leadership capacity and increased equity efforts related to instructional coaching for equity in the classroom, walkthroughs, increase and shifting in mindset. Because before we can just go in and do the work of equity, we really need to pay a great deal of attention to the mindsets, making sure that we examine those beliefs, those biases, so that we're all on the same footing as we're moving forward. And then we're hoping that that work will ultimately increase student outcomes as it relates to student suspension rates, because we know that teacher biases, administrator biases all play a part into that number that Dwight talked about around suspension rates. So we are doing a number of different programs speaking to what Dwight talked about as integrating equity efforts across all departments. It shouldn't just be in one department. So we want to come in and make sure unconscious bias is discussed and talked about in all departments, making sure that we're talking about implicit bias in the brain, microaggressions, and then going as deep as power and privilege. We're also, as the step around prioritizing regular equity training, walks, and summits, that at CAAASA we have a 5-day Equity Institute. And that is for folks from all different departments within the organization. Another thing that was mentioned about an equity leader certification, we are excited that this year we will be launching our brand new Equity Administrator Academy. We've spent over 30 hours in creating and outlining this curriculum that will be launched starting in September, because I agree, we need to make sure that our equity leaders know what they're doing. You know, across the state, you're always seeing a new position, a new equity leader here, a new equity position there, but what is it that we're supposed to be doing? How do we lead the work for equity? Who's teaching us how to lead that work for equity? So that was one of the thinkings around creating this Equity Administrator Academy, so we can help our folks understand the importance of when you get in this role, what do you need to do? What's the roadmap? What are the important areas? And then the last thing I'll speak to is our equity team lab. And I'll give a little lobbying too. CAAASA submitted an application. And through that lab, we're really wanting to build team capacity. I can't be everywhere. CAAASA can't be everywhere. The goal is that we create a trainer of trainer model where folks from the school site are coming and being trained, and then they're able to go back and lead this work at their school sites. You will see the greatest change when it's led from the school site, not the superintendent or the principal. So really giving teachers and site principals the support that they need to get the learning, build the capacity, have some time to go back and begin to implement, test solutions, come up with new ideas, and then come back to the training, what worked, what didn't work, what are research-based practices that we can learn from. So those are the things that we're doing at CAAASA. I could say a whole lot more, but I understand the time. We are definitely passionate about doing this work of leading for equity, because when I think about myself as a young lady from Mississippi coming into California, I left right after high school. I think it was a week after high school, I got on a Greyhound bus and I came to California looking for more opportunities. Our students need and they deserve the best quality education, and it's my role to make sure that I'm building that capacity in leaders to ensure that that's happening in our school sites.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate you giving
Thank
us
you.
that update. Thank you so much. Okay, I asked for public comment, as I recall, so I think we're moving on to items 7 and 8. Maybe we combine those two, but I understand that Sandy's probably going to have to leave us in about a few minutes, and that we are hoping to wrap up by 12:30. So Tom, Executive Director, this is item 7, Executive Director's Progress Report.
I get the hint, so we don't have a lot of time. So I think I'm going to just call up some staff folks in particular. In my progress report, actually, really, I wanted to kind of pull out 2 specific items to discuss. One was, as we talked about, the PLN, the PLX plan for this year too. So I think that is timely, right? So that so I'll have each come up and speak to that directly. I was going to have Carla Estrada, who has led the work around our pilots, share a little bit of our last summit that we had, and that work is ending. Although it's probably going to look a little bit different next year too, and in particular highlight a couple of the 2 pilots. But I may move that forward and just ask some of the rest of the staff to come up and share some of the key work that they're doing around the next element of the report. But we'll go ahead and start with East sharing a little bit about what we're doing around the PLN and PLX plan for this year.
Hello again. Can you hear me all right? So I really want to be sensitive to this timing issue too. So I think the way I'd like to approach it, if you're all comfortable, is I had a plan for what to address. There were some questions that came up I want to make sure to address. If at any point there are questions, just feel free to let me know. I'm happy to respond to anything. So perhaps the best place to start is that the CCEE has done a ton of thinking around this idea of what next year holds for the PLNs. The initiative was set to be 2017 to 19 in its current iteration. We've been engaged in this formative evaluation process, and we've been learning from that process. One of the things that has come up is this idea of sustainability. So we gave some thought to how could we provide some initial support as a bridge to ongoing sustainable PLN practice. And so what we arrived at based on the findings in this formative evaluation so far, which is still getting finalized, was that we could provide an application process for a single year, the single year bridge. And that application process would essentially have 2 parts. One part would be an impact plan, where currently operating PLNs would be very clear with us, I think, about the very issues all of you have raised. What specific evidence of progress is there going to be? How are we going to know that that progress is impacting student level systems? And we have 3 specific areas that we're asking folks to address. One is continuous improvement, one is equity, and the other is around this idea of student level systems. And so in their plans, they'll be addressing those 3 areas, and they can request funds. These funds are matching funds, where they say, based on this work, based on our charge, based on what it's going to cost to bring people together, to develop resources, and then scale those resources and share those resources. These are what the costs are, and we would like to request these matching funds from the CCEE to do that work. So the first part is this bridge PLN. It's a single year. The second part is a bridge PLX, and the bridge PLX is modeled after the structure that exists currently, where there's a PLX coach that meets with the PLN facilitators on a regular basis to talk about their practice and how they can go back and obviously continue to improve their practice locally. We're going to try to really focus that work on the impact plan this year. So when the PLN facilitators come to these PLX meetings, these bridge PLX meetings, they're going to be bringing more data with them than they have previously, and there's going to be a focus from meeting to meeting on the impact that's taking place, adjustments that need to be made based on data and other evidence that's been collected. So we're really going to try to keep that focus specific and ongoing. Because the design is for a single year, another part of that PLX model is going to be looking at what it takes to support that PLN and doing its work autonomously in the future. So we have a year, if you're going to engage in this process, to think about what is this going to look like when this round of funding ends, and how do we make sure that these practices continue. We realize that it's also possible that there are folks who would be interested in developing a new PLN. And this idea of the bridge is that if you are currently doing this work, this would be a bridge to additional support. But we also want to recognize, again, that there are folks who may want to launch something new. If that's the case, there are going to be two different processes that we're going to offer, or supports rather. The first is we're going to create a suite of online tools that are going to be freely accessible. It's going to include the results from our formative evaluation, along with sort of what we're calling right now a how-to guide. So it would help anybody interested in launching something new to see how is it that you get one of these things off the ground? How do you get a network to be successful? How do you think about issues around equity and data and so on? We've also made the offer for individuals to be able to contact us for one-on-one support. I can tell you I've already gotten one such inquiry. There's going to be an LEA I'll be following up with in September who wants to get something new off the ground, and will provide advice and assistance around launching something new. I think the last thing that I want to make sure to call out based on some of the previous comments that were made is that the applications that others have referenced to have come in. We are in the process of processing those applications. Once we have that final list, we will be notifying those applicants with approved applications, or everybody with a status update by June 21st. And then the work is going to move quickly, as you might guess, because we have to put in place what the PLX structure, the PLX combinations are going to be. We need to have a whole lot of work that's already started that we're going to start to focus on even more intensely around an aligned curriculum across those PLXs, and make sure the initiative can be set and ready to go by next school year. So with that, I'm happy to answer any and all questions.
Any questions, comments? Tim?
I think just more of a comment. I think that this is the important part. This is really, where we have to just scale. It's scaling up, and it's shared. We talked about best practices from day one. We've had 54 of these PLNs that have met. What are the best practices that they've learned? How are we sharing it? And, it's accountability, but it's also sharing with the field. I mean, and understanding as you're evaluating new ones, I would just say, the lens should be, how is a first grade student, a fifth grade student, and ninth grade student's experience going to be transformed in the classroom? How is the teacher's instruction going to be transformed? How is the school site going to be transformed? So, I think we've been up here a lot, which is important, but I really think as we look at next steps, we really got to get focused. We talk about student outcomes, but I think we really need to be not just in the broad term in terms of the data, and all these things. Data is important, but really thinking about fundamentally the student experience in the classroom. I think we really have to do that as we're evaluating the existing networks and looking at new networks coming in. So that's my comments.
Ditto.
Duly noted.
Okay. All right.
All right.
Thanks,
you so much.
Ish. Appreciate it. You're very popular these days, you can tell.
I really want to thank Ish and his team, in particular, the folks that worked. We, as he said, we put a lot of thought into this. We've thought and made, Ish has revised this like a half a dozen times to the point, because we pushed hard on really all of us trying to figure out to get exactly at what we've talked about, right? How do we build capacity, right? And how do we get at student outcomes, right? And that's very intentional. You'll see that in each of these plans, and that's how we'll be evaluating. But then we've also talked on that capacity piece on, as I mentioned earlier, again, none of this happens quickly, right? And so 2 years, right? Now we're going to go this other year. And then the other piece too is where do people have some skin in the game, right? Into making sure that they're putting their own resources up, which they are. And then even the next year, we've talked about this, what we've learned in all of our other work too, is the importance of a coach, right? And being able to have somebody that helps you to go back and implement. And so we're even having that. So there's coaches again tied to this piece. And then we're even talking about next year, folks would still have the ability, now they're doing the work on their own, right? But now we're going to still be able to provide some coaching. So we're trying to slowly get them to where they need to be. And that's kind of where that capacity building piece ends. And so it was really important to us to not just stop. And I will tell you, that's been probably the hardest part about the pilot districts, shifting a little bit too, is that, man, we were getting at some really good things, right? We're really starting to get at, and I shared some of this in the report too, and I'll shift a little bit. It's interesting, we're getting these grassroots efforts. This document, right, that CAAASA and Dwight produce, we had conversations here within like the last couple of weeks, and I had talked with Dwight about this idea of how do we highlight and promote some of what's out there so it's a resource for folks, but also promotes the work and did it. And then Dwight did it on his own, right? He's like, oh, here it is, because he's proud of what happened, right? And wants to kind of disseminate it. At our last pilot district, and I'll hand these out too, one of our pilots is LA Unified Local District Central. So they've been one of our pilots from the very beginning, and what they have is they have basically 5 schools, right? And they're all, these 5 schools have kind of come together within LA Unified Central. So they have their local district central superintendent who's been each of these meetings. And so they have teachers and principals who have all kind of come together, and they're really trying to go after English language learners, right? And so really trying to figure out professional development. So we helped fund some of the professional development for those teams to kind of go through, and then how could they actually go in, and they did these short cycles around, this is what we want to do. And so we went to this training, and we're going to go in and we're going to do this for the next 2 months, right? We're going to go in, and then we're actually going to go in and do walkthroughs together, and we're going to go in and measure and see if we're actually getting any type of student outcomes, right? And they came back together based on that data, shifted it again. And so what you see here is they're real proud of their work. They produced it. It's not, we can help them do it a little bit better, but I mean, it's an example of kind of where they're going, and then they're already moving forward. So they're if we're going to help them or not next year, right? They've already said they're coming together, and they've made the decision now that they are going to move with all of the schools within, because these are just a pilot, right? They're going to move towards doing this in every single one of their schools within their boundaries around the local district central, which is right in the central part of LA Unified. The other piece that I wanted to highlight is, and we are still doing some work with them, is the work around Anaheim. And it was interesting. I talked to Dwight about Anaheim a little bit earlier too. They've done some really unique work. They actually have, as part of their team, teachers, their superintendent, as well as principals, as well as the university. So the university has been part of their team from the very beginning. And one of the things that they had asked us to support is, again, they're working around ELD. They have a large population, and what they're finding is that they're trying to impact some of their administrators, and they've been working with their teachers around this area. And they're struggling to attract folks to come in, and then the new folks who are coming in they're having to start over again because they haven't had some of this professional development, if you will, around how to work with ELD students in particular. So they asked us to support, and we're doing it with the district, to they created with the local university they picked some of their best teachers in the district, and they are actually helping to pay for them to get their credential, right? And we are helping to support that, and they've got a particular strand all around ELD, right? In particular, they've shifted it and been able to do that, and then work with the university so that they were able to still get it approved, right? So that they can be able to meet that need too. And so that's a particular strategy that they've gone up to. They actually have their first cohort that's in there this year, right? And we're helping to support that. We'll also help support them next year as well. And then they have these ideas, this coach, and how they're going to go in and then really try to coach them when they get those positions. And really what their goal is they want all those folks to go to work in their district, right? So they're training up their own folks to be able to kind of sustain it both at the local level. As far as the pilots as a whole, as you know, the work is done. We have had I think I've mentioned this before on this fee-for-service idea. We have a group that have asked us to come back and support them next year. They would still like to do summits. They really like the idea of the summit. And so we have been talking about, and Carla would share this too, that we're actually thinking about bringing some of the districts we're working with, and Sue, if I could think of a different way, not CAB 1840, I'm still trying, but I know everybody knows who I'm talking about when I say it. But in the work that we're doing with those districts, we actually want to bring them together in a summit, and we want to bring some of these districts who've been doing it at the same time in a large group. And so we would put our resources around having the summit. They would have to use their resources to get people there, right? And because right now we've paid for all of those things. And we've got a few of our folks that already said, yes, I want to do it. We're not done yet. Again, building their capacity moving forward. We will have our draft right now. And so, as you know, we have a report that's due out in the fall, right? That we'll have to share what we've learned during that time. And it's So we've had an evaluation, an evaluator has been working with us all year long, so we've kind of got our first draft of that. Our goal is to have that done by the end of the summer, right? So that we don't wait until that time too. And so you'll see some of these types of things in that work as well. So I'm excited about that work and excited that we can kind of look at how we can use it going forward and maybe shift now, again, with those districts we're working around technical assistance. What's really cool about the pilots is people learn from each other. So we've been very intentional on you have time, you're here together to work with your team, but then we make them go work with other teams so that they have to hear what they're doing. And it's interesting, Anaheim and LA Unified in particular, they teamed up and asked to be together because they're doing some very similar work. So Suji, if you wouldn't mind coming up and talking a little bit about the models of continuous improvement and some of our new work around that.
Our models of continuous improvement is that shift that we've made from calling it the bright spots to our, the way in which we are identifying districts who are showing ongoing sustainable change, especially as it relates to student outcomes measured by the dashboard. And so we have finished our first year of taking a look at the methodology that we would use by which we identify these models of continuous improvement. So as part of this initial work, I think I've presented over the past several months about some of the data work that we've done, really focusing in this kind of initial year, taking a look at districts who have shown some, again, progressive, ongoing improvement over the past 5 years now of data available around decreasing suspension rates as it relates to students with disabilities, and then taking a look in as we identify those districts where we've seen that kind of ongoing, again, and sustained change, delving in deeper into some of the systemic programmatic aspects, the context around the changes that have been that have taken place in that district. And so as you see in that brief summary, we've done some work now with our site visits with Chula Vista Elementary School District, and delving in deeper into, again, some of the changes that we see, the policy decisions that they've made, what that's looked like from implementation and decision-making at that central office level to the school site and classroom levels, how that is reflected in kind of the data collection and the ways in which they are looking and using that data, and then also really thinking about what does that mean systemically across the district around other student outcomes. How does that impact, achievement? How does that impact, rates for other student groups as well? I think now our next piece here is, we'll be wrapping that up again this very initial year, taking a look at a single case study that we have done with our partners at WestEd. I think as we move into the next year of planning, CCEE is taking a real look at now, how do we expand this work further as again, this first year was just identifying that methodology, the kind of ways in which we identify districts that have shown this progressive, ongoing, sustained change. How do we take a look at that across other indicators, other subgroups, other areas of focus? How do we expand upon this work, dig in deeper, and then how do we ultimately share this out in an ongoing way for folks so that it's not just a matter of identifying districts and putting up a list, but really helping folks understand the whys behind that kind of change.
Yeah, and the thing I would tell you that, because you're hearing some, if you've read the LPI has they've identified Chula Vista and some other districts across the state too in this report too. What we're trying to do is use our research, and you're hearing hopefully you're hearing this theme around this toolkit idea in our work to actually promote that. So we're trying to shift from these larger concepts to actually going in and showing examples. So we had a team go down. Anna is refining a podcast right now that we just that she's worked on around Chula Vista, where we've interviewed and went in and interviewed the superintendent and parents and students and teachers and some dramatic themes that you're hearing there, right, around some of the work that they did around social and emotional learning, right, in particular, and how they were able to reduce chronic absenteeism and suspensions and really get at they're doing some work that other folks are not able to do. And one of the things you'll hear in particular around Chula Vista is a couple of key points is, it was interesting because it was around English and language development, is around, they put together a district design team, right, that had all the various stakeholders, and then they went to each school level and they have these local design teams, and that it's that they have designed together. They're doing some things systemically across the district, but they've asked their teachers to lead that work. Very unique, right, in that district, to where, and you'll hear some of that highlighted, and we highlighted that pretty strongly in the podcast, that, you know, you'll hear from those voices, and you'll hear from parents, and then the students who are owning part of that work too. So, because part of the question I asked is, well, so why are we doing this if Linda's doing this and other folks are doing this piece too? And what we're actually trying to do is actually put some resources and tools around it so that folks can actually do something with that, to think about how they might be able to implement something similar, and then helping the district kind of promote that at the same time. Josh, if you wouldn't mind, come up and talk a little bit about the work with the Labor Management Institute and some of the work that we're going to do, we're doing in Monterey.
Good morning, good afternoon again. Josh Daniels, Director of Finance and Operations. Very briefly, we have been working with the Monterey County Office of Education. They have expressed a real interest in building their capacity and the capacity of their school districts around labor management relations. They previously had done some work in this area. We became aware of it and were interested in partnering with them. Obviously, as with most things, we try to work with and through county offices. And so by partnering with Monterey and the work that they're doing in this area, we believe we're sort of looking to see whether this approach that they're taking, bringing in districts with teams in conjunction with Monterey's chosen to work with the Labor Management Initiative, to really see how that can build the capacity in this area. So we've just begun the work. We have a contract in place with them. We'll be doing a little bit of work possibly at the end of this year, but much of it into next year, and to learn from that experience and hopefully grow that approach with other districts.
Yeah, and so the key piece there is that they had some districts who were going to the Labor Management Institute, who then told some other districts, and then the county office got involved, and they realized they had this local cadre, and then they would all go to the training, and then they'd all go back and go to work, right? And then they, through kind of their own grassroots efforts, they say, hey, why don't we meet and talk about what are you doing? How are you implementing that? What are you doing? And so they've asked us to support their work next year. They want to, kind of like the PLN idea, right? Of bringing those folks together after they've gone to the training to come back and talk about how they can implement that and support each other locally, and then grow that locally. And the county office take that key role in that too. So we're excited to kind of study that and support it. I'm going to go down, and they have a 2-day institute this summer, and I guess it's in a couple of weeks. And so I'm going to go down and spend a day down there and participate in it, so I can get my head around it a little bit too, to make sure to figure out how we can support it also going forward. So
and one thing I'll just note about the county office is that they themselves are going through the process. So it's not just them suggesting to their districts, but they're sending a team to all the meetings that they expect districts to come to as well, with their HR director and their union president. And so they are actually doing the work that they're expecting their districts to do. So it's impressive leadership by Deneen, the superintendent down there.
Yeah. So the last thing is, there's other things in the report too, but I just wanted to take an opportunity always to thank the staff. I'm about 3 weeks away from my first year with the CCEE, and just feel so fortunate. You see the talent every time, and you see what's unique about our work is we do our work through other people, right? Which is actually really hard. Sometimes it's easier to do it yourself. And so working with other folks, it takes a lot of skill and resources and tools and patience, and they all do a beautiful job with that. So I really want to thank them for all of their efforts to support me.
Thank you, Tom. And just, I appreciate you truncating your report, but make sure that everybody has a chance to look at both item 7 and item 8. There's a lot of rich information in there. Appreciate, again, you keeping us all informed about that. So any public comment on either item 7 or item 8? Okay, seeing none. We did 9 and 10 out of order. Now we're on to item 11, which is general public comment. Is there any general public comment, folks wishing to comment on items that were not on the agenda? I see Lee Angela coming to the podium.
Good morning.
Good morning.
And I'll be quick. I just, Leangela Reed on behalf of the Small School Districts Association. I just wanted to take a moment to thank Executive Director Armelino for coming to the SSDA conference, speaking to a group of folks and interacting, and a lot of the superintendents. That's the one conference that they get to go to each year, and it was really helpful for them to have that opportunity to interact, and we've heard a lot of really positive comments afterwards, so thank you.
Thank you, Leangela. I think that completes our business. Before I adjourn the meeting, I just want to mention or remind folks that our next meeting is Thursday, August 1st. I'm looking at Erica because we jump around. Is it here, or do you know where the... It's going to be at City Hall. Okay, we get to the fancy technology next time. All right, thank you all for coming. The meeting of the CCEE is adjourned.